Hello there and welcome to Biology with Charles, where curiosity softens its voice and science settles in for the evening. Tonight we're going to spend some time with something quiet, common, and surprisingly easy to miss. The slow and subtle story of nutrient deficiencies. Not the dramatic kind that announces itself with trumpets and flashing lights, but the kind that slips into a life politely, rearranges a few things in the background, and waits to be noticed. A body can be missing something important for quite a while before it says so clearly. At first it may only offer a small complaint, a little more tiredness than usual, skin that seems different for no obvious reason, a strange craving, muscles that feel less cooperative, a mood that turns flatter or more fragile. The trouble is that these things are ordinary enough to dismiss. Modern life gives us plenty of reasons to feel run down. We blame work, poor sleep, stress, age, weather, screens, or the mysterious sadness of realizing you have opened the refrigerator and somehow found nothing appealing for the third time in one evening. But the body's practical. It does not complain just to be difficult. If something essential is missing, even in small amounts, it begins adjusting. It rations. It prioritizes. It takes what little it has and sends it where it matters most. Over time, that strategy keeps us going, but it also leaves clues, and those clues are what we are going to follow tonight. Before we begin properly, I would love to know where you are listening from and what time it is in your little corner of the world. There is something strangely fitting about talking about the body's quiet signals, at the hour when most signals begin to soften anyway. And if you find this soothing, helpful, or simply a peaceful way to end the day, I would be very grateful if you liked the video and subscribed. It helps this calm little space reach other people who might need a softer landing at the end of their evening. Now get comfortable, loosen the day a little, and let us begin with the simple but important idea that the body often whispers before it ever has to raise its voice. One of the most misleading things about nutrient deficiencies is that people imagine them as old-fashioned problems. We tend to associate them with sailors crossing oceans, children in history books, extreme poverty, famine, or very dramatic circumstances where food is obviously scarce. We picture obvious illness, we picture severe thinness, visible weakness, or textbook symptoms so neat and complete that no one could miss them. Real life is rarely that tidy. Deficiencies can happen in people who eat every day, in people who eat a lot, in people who think they eat fairly well, and in people who would never once suspect that the problem is not how much food they are getting, but what is and is not actually in it. A person can be well fed in the modern sense and undernourished in the biological sense. That is one of the strange tensions of our time. Supermarkets are full, restaurants are busy, snacks exist in quantities that might have astonished most of human history. Yet the body does not care very much about the abundance of wrappers, flavours, or convenience. It cares about raw materials. It wants amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, trace elements, and enough energy to run the whole system without cutting too many corners. It is less impressed by bright packaging. It has never once been fooled by a biscuit described as multi-grain indulgence. The body is not snobbish exactly. It is just very literal. To understand deficiency, it helps to think of the body not as one single thing, but as a city that never sleeps. Every cell is doing work, blood is moving deliveries, hormones are carrying messages, bones are being remodeled, nerves are transmitting signals, immune cells are patrolling, muscles are waiting for instruction. The brain is coordinating everything while also somehow inventing anxiety about conversations from 6 years ago. For that city to function, it needs supplies. Some are needed in large amounts like protein, fats and carbohydrates. Others are needed in smaller amounts, but are no less important. Vitamins and minerals are often like keys, switches, helpers and tiny tools that allow larger processes to happen at all. Without them, the machinery slows, stumbles, or begins to work around the problem in less efficient ways. That is why the early signs of deficiency can feel so vague. When a factory in a city has one missing part, the city does not instantly collapse. it adapts. Another department works harder, resources are shifted, less urgent projects are delayed. The same thing happens in the body. If iron is low, oxygen transport may become less efficient, but the body tries to cope. If vitamin D is low, bone and immune functions may become less supported, but the system keeps moving. If magnesium is low, nerves and muscles may become more irritable, but the lights do not go out all at once. In the beginning, the body does not shut down. It becomes quieter in some places and more strained in others. This is one reason so many nutrient deficiencies are mistaken for personality changes, bad habits, or simply the burden of being alive in a busy world. Fatigue becomes, I guess I'm just tired lately. Poor concentration becomes, I've been distracted. Low mood becomes, maybe I'm stressed. Hair shedding becomes, it must be the season. Restless legs, brittle nails, mouth sores, strange tingling, lightheadedness, muscle cramps, getting sick more often, poor wound healing, cravings, weakness, sleep changes, dry skin, paleness, and irritability can each be explained away one by one. And to be fair, sometimes they should be. Not every symptom is a deficiency. Not every low-energy week is a vitamin problem. But the point is that the body often gives hints long before it gives certainty. There is also a hierarchy to how the body handles shortage. When something is scarce, survival comes first. That sounds obvious, but it has consequences. The body protects the brain, the heart, the blood, and the organs that matter most for immediate survival. Less urgent things begin to show strain earlier. Hair, skin, nails, reproductive function, energy levels, exercise performance and mood can all become the places where shortage shows up first. That can make deficiencies seem cosmetic or minor at the start, when in fact they are early warnings. A person may notice dull skin or hair changes and think of it as a beauty problem. The body may be treating it as a budget problem. It is saying, gently, that it is redirecting limited resources to more important places. This pattern makes evolutionary sense. If food quality worsens, it is better for the body to preserve the heart than the shine of your hair. Better to keep blood cells functioning than to maintain nails that deserve a small round of applause from the manicure industry. Better to preserve muscle contraction and nerve conduction than to make sure you feel especially radiant in bright kitchen lighting. The body is loyal, but it is ruthless about priorities. Different nutrients play very different roles, and this is why deficiencies can look so different from one another. Iron helps carry oxygen in the blood. Vitamin B12 is essential for nerve function and red blood cell formation. Folate is needed for DNA synthesis and cell division. Vitamin D helps regulate calcium balance and supports bone health, muscle function, and immune processes. Magnesium participates in hundreds of enzymatic reactions. Iodine is necessary for thyroid hormone production. Zinc supports immune function, wound healing, growth, taste, smell, and more. Vitamin C is needed for collagen formation and antioxidant protection. Calcium is essential not only for bones, but for muscles and signaling. Vitamin A supports vision, immune function, and epithelial tissues. Vitamin K helps with blood clotting and bone metabolism. Protein itself, though not a vitamin or mineral, is foundational to nearly everything. What matters here is that when one of these goes missing, the effects do not stay confined to a neat little box. The body is integrated. A shortage in one place causes ripples elsewhere. Low iron may cause fatigue, but it can also affect exercise tolerance, cognition, temperature sensitivity, and mood. Low B12 may create tiredness, but also numbness, balance problems, memory changes, and a sore tongue. Low iodine affects thyroid hormones, which then affect metabolism, temperature regulation, energy, mood, and growth. Low vitamin D may influence bones, muscles, and perhaps how often someone seems to catch every miserable cold that wanders through the room. Nothing in the body happens alone. Another reason deficiencies can hide is that symptoms develop slowly. We are much better at noticing sudden change than gradual drift. If you lose a large amount of energy in a day, you notice. If you lose a tiny amount each month, you adjust your expectations. What once felt normal becomes forgotten. You begin saying things like, "I've always been kind of tired," even when you have not. Or, "I guess this is just what getting older feels like," even when part of it may be correctable. Humans are remarkably adaptable, which is useful in many situations but not always ideal for noticing slow problems. A frog, if you believe the old metaphor, may not leap from the pan. A person may simply buy stronger coffee. There is also the matter of absorption, which complicates the story further. A deficiency does not always mean someone failed to eat enough of something. Sometimes they ate it and did not absorb it well. Conditions affecting the stomach, intestines, pancreas, or gallbladder can reduce absorption. Certain medications interfere with nutrient uptake or metabolism. Alcohol can impair absorption and storage. Inflammation in the gut can limit what gets through. A person with a restricted diet may be at risk because they avoid certain foods. A person with a perfectly reasonable diet may be at risk because their digestive system is not doing what it should. In older adults, absorption of some nutrients like B12 can become less efficient. In pregnancy, needs rise. In heavy training, losses or demands may increase. During illness, recovery may require more than usual. It is not always a simple story of good diet versus bad diet. Biology is rarely polite enough to keep things that simple. That matters because people can become oddly moral about food problems. If someone is deficient, others sometimes assume they must have eaten foolishly or neglected themselves in some obvious way. Often the reality is less dramatic and much more ordinary. Someone got busy, someone developed food aversions, someone cut out food groups for a reason that once seemed sensible. Someone had digestive symptoms for years and normalized them. Someone had a heavy menstrual cycle and steadily lost iron faster than they replaced it. Someone took a medication long-term that quietly influenced nutrient balance. Someone survived on easy foods because life was hard and convenience kept winning. Most bodies do not run into deficiency because their owners are lazy or careless. They run into deficiency because life is complicated, biology is demanding, and the body is very good at compensating until it is not. Children, older adults, pregnant people, athletes, people with chronic illnesses, people with digestive disorders, and people on highly restrictive diets can all be more vulnerable in different ways. Infants and children are growing fast and need steady supplies. Older adults may eat less, absorb less, or have more medications in the picture. Pregnancy increases demand dramatically for certain nutrients. Athletes may burn through more energy, lose minerals through sweat, or accidentally undereat while training hard. People avoiding animal foods, dairy, grains, or multiple categories of food may do very well if they plan carefully, but risk deficiencies if they do not. People with chronic inflammation or malabsorption can eat correctly and still fall short. The body keeps score, but it does not always reveal why in obvious handwriting. Then there are cravings, one of the more fascinating and less reliable clues. People sometimes assume cravings are the body's perfect language. Craving chocolate must mean magnesium. Craving salty foods must mean sodium. Craving meat must mean iron. There is a grain of appeal in this idea because it feels elegant. Unfortunately, the body is not always so clear. Cravings are influenced by habit, pleasure, stress, memory, hormones, and convenience. Sometimes they do loosely overlap with need. A person low in iron may develop pica, a craving for non-food substances like ice, clay, or starch, which is one of the stranger examples of deficiency behavior in medicine. But most cravings are not precise nutritional telegrams from the cells. Sometimes the body's asking for energy, and your brain translates that into pastries. Sometimes you're tired and your mind calls it hunger. Sometimes you are bored, and the pantry seems suddenly philosophical. Still, even if cravings are unreliable, appetite itself can reflect nutrient problems. Deficiencies can alter taste, reduce appetite, increase weakness, or make eating more difficult. Zinc deficiency, for example, can affect taste and smell. Low iron or B vitamin issues can contribute to mouth soreness or changes in appetite. The relationship goes both ways. Poor intake can worsen deficiency, and deficiency can make intake worse. A body low on resources can become less interested in the very process that might help restore them. Biology has a dark sense of humour sometimes. The body also speaks through the nervous system in ways people do not always connect to nutrition. Numbness, tingling, burning feet, restless legs, poor balance, irritability, brain fog, headaches, and changes in mood can all have many possible causes, but nutrients belong on that list. B12 is especially important here because deficiency can affect nerves as well as blood. Magnesium plays roles in nerve and muscle excitability. Low sodium, though a different kind of issue, can affect brain function dramatically in severe cases. The brain is chemistry on a schedule, and it does not enjoy missing ingredients. We tend to think of nutrition as fuel and exercise as performance, but nutrition is also signaling, maintenance, repair, and electrical stability. A body short on key nutrients does not just feel tired. It may feel strange. Skin and eyes can offer hints as well. Pallor can suggest anemia. Easy bruising might point toward vitamin C or K issues, among other causes. Dry skin, cracking at the corners of the mouth, glossitis, poor wound healing, brittle nails, spoon-shaped nails, hair thinning, and rashes can all show up in deficiency states. Again, none of these is exclusive. The body is not kind enough to label symptoms for us, but patterns matter. When several small clues gather in the same person, the story becomes harder to ignore. Perhaps the most important thing to understand is that deficiency is not always an all-or-nothing condition. There is a range between optimal status and severe disease. A person may not have scurvy, but they may have low vitamin C intake that affects tissue repair or immune resilience. A person may not have dramatic anemia, but iron stores may be low enough to affect energy and performance. A person may not have obvious bone disease, but vitamin D may be insufficient for months or years. Modern medicine often notices problems when they are measurable and clinically meaningful, which is appropriate, but lived experience often notices them sooner as something feels off. That space between perfect health and obvious disease is where many people live for quite a while, and that is why this subject matters. Nutrient deficiencies are not only about rare diseases or dramatic medical cases, they're about the ordinary human experience of feeling not quite right and not knowing why. They're about the fact that the body keeps asking for what it needs, sometimes very quietly, in a language we were never formally taught to speak. We are taught to count calories, fear carbs, worship protein, argue about seed oils, panic over sugar, praise supplements, distrust supplements, and become accidental experts in internet nutrition wars. Meanwhile, the body is often asking simpler questions. Do I have enough iron to carry oxygen? Enough iodine to make thyroid hormone? Enough B12 to support nerves and blood? Enough calcium and vitamin D to support bone and muscle? Enough zinc to heal, taste, and defend? Enough magnesium to steady this electrical storm of a system? Enough overall nourishment to keep the city running without stripping the wallpaper for firewood? There is also comfort in this topic, oddly enough. A deficiency can sound worrying, but it is also often understandable. It means the body is following rules. It means symptoms are not always random, weakness is not always moral failure, and fatigue is not always laziness. Sometimes biology is simply short on supplies. That does not make every problem easy to fix, but it does make many problems less mysterious. When you see the body as a system responding logically to shortage, a lot of human struggle becomes less personal and more practical. The body is not betraying you, it is improvising. Tonight we are starting with the body's whispers because that is where most of these stories begin. Long before lab values become dramatic, long before textbook images appear, Long before someone says, "How did I not notice this sooner?" there is often a period of gentle change, more tired, more brittle, less focused, colder than usual, slower to recover, a bit weaker, a bit flatter, a little off. That is not enough to diagnose anything, and it should not become an excuse for self-diagnosis at every minor inconvenience. But it is enough to respect the possibility that the body has patterns, and those patterns matter. So as we continue, we are going to follow those patterns one by one. We will look at the missing nutrients that shape energy, mood, blood, bones, nerves, skin, hormones, and appetite. We will explore how shortages develop, why they can be easy to miss, and how the effects appear both inside and out. And the further we go, the more the body's clues begin to make sense. Because once you know what certain nutrients actually do, many of those small mysterious complaints start to look less like random bad luck, and more like the first lines of a message that has been there all along. There is a particular kind of tiredness that people learn to live with because it does not arrive like a disaster. It arrives politely. It does not knock over furniture or demand dramatic attention. It simply moves into the background and starts changing the tone of everything. Mornings become heavier. Small tasks require more persuasion. Exercise feels less rewarding. Concentration begins to flicker. The day is still possible, but it no longer feels well lit. Many people call this stress, overwork, age, poor sleep, or bad luck. And sometimes they are right. But sometimes the problem is quieter and more chemical than that. Sometimes the body is missing one of the vitamins that helps it turn food into usable life. Energy is a word we use casually, but in the body it is a serious and constant project. Every heartbeat, every thought, every muscle contraction, every nerve signal, every repair, every breath, every warm hand wrapped around a mug on a cold evening depends on energy being made, moved, and spent. The body is not a campfire that simply burns whatever you throw at it. It is a tightly managed system of conversions. Food must be broken down, nutrients must be absorbed, cells must extract what they need, enzymes must do their jobs, chemical pathways must keep moving in the correct sequence. In all of this, vitamins often act less like fuel themselves and more like the staff that keeps the power station operating. They are assistants, helpers, cofactors, little enabling molecules that allow larger reactions to happen on time and in the right order. When they are missing, the machinery does not always stop. It just becomes slower, clumsier, and less efficient. This is why vitamin deficiencies often create the feeling of a slow fading rather than a sudden collapse. A person can still function. They may still go to work, make dinner, answer messages, and remember to buy toothpaste 3 days later than intended. But underneath that ordinary surface, the body may be doing more work for less result. What once felt easy now feels oddly expensive. The simplest explanation is that a great many vitamins are involved in metabolism, blood production, nerve function, tissue maintenance, and the body's ability to extract and use energy from carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. If these are low, you may not feel instantly ill. You may just feel less fully powered. The B vitamins are especially important in this story. They are often grouped together because they share a theme. They help the body process energy and maintain the nervous system, blood, and many other vital functions. But it helps to slow down and meet them one by one, because each has its own role, and each deficiency leaves its own fingerprints. Vitamin B1, also called thiamine, is one of the first names worth knowing. Thiamine helps cells turn carbohydrates into energy, and it is especially important for tissues that are highly active like the brain and heart. A body that's low in thiamine may begin to struggle in ways that seem general at first. Fatigue, irritability, poor concentration, weakness, appetite loss. Nothing about those symptoms stands up and waves. They are the sort of symptoms that could belong to 100 ordinary weeks of life. But thiamine is deeply involved in energy metabolism, and when it is not around in sufficient amounts, cells cannot process fuel as smoothly as they should. In more severe deficiency, the consequences become much clearer. Historically, severe thiamine deficiency is known for causing beriberi, a disease that can affect the nerves and the cardiovascular system. Dry beriberi affects nerves and can lead to numbness, weakness, difficulty walking, and wasting. Wet beriberi affects the heart and circulation, leading to swelling, rapid heart rate, and shortness of breath. There is also Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, a serious brain disorder associated especially with alcoholism and profound thiamine deficiency. But long before any dramatic illness appears, there may be a quieter period where the person simply feels diminished, a little less sharp, a little less steady, a little less charged. The spark has not gone out. It has just stopped burning cleanly. Vitamin B2, riboflavin, rarely gets glamorous attention, which is a pity because it is one of those dependable molecules doing essential backstage work. Riboflavin helps with energy production, cellular function, and the metabolism of fats, drugs, and steroids. It is part of coenzymes that help shuttle electrons in the body's energy-making pathways. In plainer terms, it helps your cells run their little internal power systems. When riboflavin is low, the body may not scream in protest, but it will start showing wear. Fatigue can appear, so can cracking at the corners of the mouth, soreness of the lips, a swollen magenta tongue, eye discomfort, sensitivity to light, and skin problems. These are not the kind of symptoms that make people immediately think, "Oh yes, riboflavin." They more often make people think they need lip balm, better sleep, or a long weekend. But again, the body is often more literal than our explanations. If the nutrient that supports energy and tissue maintenance is low, the body begins to show its strain in places that renew quickly and rely on smooth cellular turnover. Then there is vitamin B3, niacin, which is central to energy metabolism. Niacin helps form NAD and NADP, coenzymes involved in hundreds of reactions, especially those that help cells harvest energy from food. Without niacin, metabolism becomes impaired in very basic ways. Severe deficiency causes pellagra, classically remembered by the 3 Ds: dermatitis, diarrhea, and dementia, with a 4th D, death, if it goes untreated. That is the historical and dramatic end of the story. But well before pellagra takes its full form, a person may feel weak, tired, mentally dulled, and physically depleted. Skin exposed to the sun may become inflamed. The digestive system may become unsettled. Mood may shift. The body may seem to be slipping in multiple areas at once because niacin is involved so widely in cellular energy and repair. One of the strange things about vitamin deficiencies is that, because they affect such fundamental processes, the resulting symptoms are often spread across the whole person. It is not just energy in the sense of pep. It is digestion, mood, skin, attention, strength, recovery, resilience. People often expect the body to organize its complaints neatly, as if each nutrient shortage should produce one tidy symptom and then wait its turn. Biology is not nearly that considerate. If a vitamin supports 100 reactions, then low levels may create 100 subtle inefficiencies, each too small to seem dramatic on its own, but together enough to change what a day feels like. Vitamin B5, pantothenic acid, is another example of a nutrient most people do not think about until they have a reason. It is part of coenzyme A, which is involved in synthesizing and metabolizing fatty acids and in extracting energy from food. True deficiency is uncommon, but when it occurs it can contribute to fatigue, irritability, numbness, sleep disturbance, restlessness, and digestive complaints. Some people describe a kind of diffuse exhaustion, the sort that never quite settles into one body part because it belongs to the whole metabolism. The body is not a machine with one dead battery. It is more like a city experiencing brownouts in multiple neighborhoods. Vitamin B6, pyridoxine, deserves more attention than it usually gets because it contributes to amino acid. Metabolism, neurotransmitter synthesis, hemoglobin formation, and more. This means B6 touches energy, mood, nerves, and blood. When B6 is low, a person may feel tired and low because red blood cell production can suffer, but they may also feel irritable, depressed, or mentally off because neurotransmitter synthesis is affected. There may be mouth sores, glossitis, skin rashes, numbness, or tingling. In other words, a shortage of one vitamin can blur the line between physical fatigue and emotional strain. A person may assume they are simply having a difficult season. Their cells may be having difficulty making what they need for blood and brain function at the same time. Folate, also known as vitamin B9, plays a central role in DNA synthesis and cell division, which makes it especially important for tissues that renew quickly and for the production of red blood cells. Folate deficiency can lead to megaloblastic anemia, where the body produces abnormally large and ineffective red blood cells. When red blood cells are not formed properly, oxygen transport suffers. The result is one of the most familiar feelings in deficiency medicine: tiredness that feels deeper than ordinary tiredness, not just sleepiness, but reduced capacity, breathlessness on exertion, weakness, pallor, the sense that climbing stairs has become strangely political. On top of that, there may be mouth soreness, poor appetite, irritability, and cognitive dullness. Once again, the theme returns. The body does not merely become tired, it becomes less able to sustain normal function across several systems at once. Vitamin B12 belongs in any serious conversation about fading energy. It is essential for red blood cell formation, DNA synthesis, and the maintenance of the nervous system. A deficiency in B12 can cause megaloblastic anemia, much like folate deficiency, which means fatigue, weakness, paleness, shortness of breath, and poor exercise tolerance may appear. But B12 adds another layer because nerves depend on it too. If deficiency continues, a person may develop numbness, tingling, burning sensations, balance problems, memory issues, and mental changes. This can make B12 deficiency particularly slippery. It may begin as tiredness and brain fog, then gradually reveal itself through neurological symptoms that feel unrelated at first. The body's need for B12 is also a useful reminder that deficiency is not always about what enters the mouth. B12 from food must be released in the stomach, bound to intrinsic factor, and absorbed in the small intestine. Problems at any step can interfere. Low stomach acid, certain autoimmune conditions, intestinal disease, surgery, medications, aging, and restrictive diets low in animal products can all increase risk. So a person may eat in a way that seems adequate to an outside observer and still slowly drift into shortage. The body notices long before the person understands why they now feel exhausted, forgetful, or less steady on their feet. Vitamin C is not usually the first vitamin people associate with energy, but it belongs in the conversation more than it seems to at first glance. Vitamin C is needed for collagen synthesis, wound healing, antioxidant defense, and helping the absorption of non-heme iron from plant foods. When it is low, people may develop fatigue, weakness, gum problems, easy bruising, poor wound healing, joint discomfort, and eventually the classic signs of scurvy if deficiency becomes severe. But before anything dramatic develops, low vitamin C can contribute to a general sense of reduced vitality. Tissues repair less well. The body absorbs iron less effectively. Minor injuries linger. The person may feel physically fragile, not necessarily in a theatrical way, but in the mundane way of being more easily depleted by ordinary life. Vitamin D is another nutrient that people often meet only after months or years of feeling vaguely less well. Technically a vitamin and also hormone-like in its actions, vitamin D helps regulate calcium and phosphate balance, and is important for bones, muscles, and immune function. When it is low, people may not feel anything obvious at first. This is part of what makes it so common and so easy to ignore. Over time, however, low vitamin D can contribute to bone pain, muscle weakness, reduced physical performance, increased risk of fractures, and in children, rickets. Some people describe low vitamin D not as a dramatic illness, but as a heaviness in the body. Muscles feel less responsive, recovery is poorer, the frame feels less supported. If you imagine the body as a house, vitamin D is part of the quiet maintenance of the beams and wiring. You may not notice its work each day, but you notice when the structure stops feeling solid. Vitamin A is better known for vision and immune health, but deficiency can also affect the general sense of vitality because it supports epithelial tissues, immune defenses, and normal growth and function in many organs. Early deficiency can lead to poor dark adaptation, dry eyes, and increased susceptibility to infection. And infection, of course, is one of the great thieves of energy. A body that gets sick more often or heals more slowly is spending more of its limited budget on repair and defense. The resulting fatigue may not be blamed on vitamin A, but the shortage may still be part of the background story. Vitamin E deficiency is less common, especially in the absence of fat malabsorption disorders, but when it occurs it can affect nerves and muscles because vitamin E is an antioxidant that protects cell membranes. Severe deficiency may lead to neuropathy, muscle weakness, vision problems, and impaired coordination. That combination again reminds us that vitality depends not just on fuel, but on protection and maintenance. Cells doing constant work generate oxidative stress, and nutrients help manage it. Without those supports, wear accumulates. Vitamin K is best known for clotting, and its deficiency is not usually introduced as an energy story. But nutrient shortages rarely stay in one lane. A body struggling with bruising, bleeding risk, or poor bone metabolism is not a body functioning at full ease. Vitamins exist as part of a network. Deficiency in one can affect the way another is used or absorbed. Diets that are chronically limited in variety rarely create elegant single deficiencies. They more often create overlapping shortages, each contributing a little to the final feeling that something is wrong. This overlap is worth staying with because real life is not a textbook case. A person living mostly on ultra-processed convenience foods, skipping meals, sleeping badly, drinking more alcohol than is ideal, avoiding sunlight, and managing chronic stress may not be missing only one vitamin. They may be running multiple small deficits at once. None may be severe enough individually to declare itself with drama, but together they can produce a very convincing impression of someone whose batteries have simply aged badly. They feel tired, unfocused, irritable, unmotivated, pale, achy, and strangely thin-skinned in every sense of the word. They may blame personality or circumstances. Meanwhile, the body is trying to run a modern schedule with an incomplete set of tools. Alcohol deserves special mention here because it is one of the most effective ways humans have invented to interfere with nutrition, while also lowering the odds of noticing. Heavy alcohol use can reduce appetite, displace nutritious food, impair absorption, damage tissues involved in nutrient handling, and increase the risk of deficiencies, especially thiamine, folate, and others. The person may appear to be eating enough overall calories while still steadily losing the micronutrients needed for normal metabolism and nerve function. The result is not just fatigue, but a deeper unraveling of energy, clarity, coordination, and resilience. The same can happen in people with digestive disorders. If the small intestine is inflamed, damaged, or surgically altered, vitamins may not be absorbed efficiently. If fat absorption is poor, fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K may fall. If stomach function changes, B12 absorption can suffer. If diarrhea is chronic, losses mount. In those cases, the body may be asking for help in a quieter dialect. The person may eat well and still feel drained because the problem lies not on the plate, but in the passage from food to bloodstream. What makes vitamin-related fatigue especially confusing is that it often touches the mind as much as the muscles. When cells are not generating energy well, when oxygen delivery is poorer, when neurotransmitter synthesis is altered, when nerves are affected, the result is not just physical weakness, it is low drive, brain fog, irritability, reduced patience, poor memory. a kind of faded motivation that can be mistaken for laziness or sadness or burnout. Sometimes it is those things. Sometimes it is also a body whose chemistry is not being adequately supplied. The distinction matters because shame is a dreadful treatment for a nutritional problem. The body's response to shortage is not moral, it is logistical. If vitamin intake is poor, if absorption is compromised, if needs are increased, or if stores are depleted, the body begins adapting. It reduces what it can. It makes fewer red blood cells, weaker tissues, less effective enzymes, less steady nerve function. It protects the essentials and lets the margin of comfort disappear first. That margin is what people often call vitality. When it shrinks, life feels flatter even before overt disease appears. This is also why some people feel strangely transformed when a true deficiency is identified and corrected. Not euphoric, not superhuman, but restored. They say things like, "I didn't realise how bad I felt until I felt better." That is one of the most revealing sentences in medicine. It tells us that slow decline is easy to normalise. If energy fades inch by inch, the person builds a new definition of normal around the loss. They buy stronger coffee, they stop taking stairs, they cancel evening plans, they think of themselves as someone who gets tired easily. Then the deficiency is treated, and the old self begins to return. Not as a miracle, but as a reminder that biochemistry has a great deal to do with personality, as it is experience from the inside. Of course, not every tired person has a vitamin deficiency. That would be too simple, and the body has never respected simple explanations for long. Sleep deprivation, depression, thyroid disease, chronic infections, inflammation, anemia from non-vitamin causes, medication side effects, overtraining, undereating, pain, and a long list of other conditions can all create fatigue. But vitamins belong in the map. They are part of the reason the body can turn food into force, maintain blood, protect nerves, heal tissues, and keep the inner lights on with something like grace. So when the body begins to dim, it is worth remembering that energy is not only about calories, it is also about chemistry. A plate can be full and a system can still be under-equipped. A person can be carrying enough fuel while lacking the tiny helpers that make the engine run smoothly. And because many of those helpers are vitamins, their absence often feels exactly like what we have been describing tonight. Not a dramatic failure, but a slow fading. A little less brightness in the mind, a little less steadiness in the muscles, a little less willingness in the day. And once you start to see vitality this way, as something built not only from sleep and willpower, but from blood, nerves, enzymes, and the quiet labour of micronutrients, the body's messages become easier to read. The missing spark is not random. It often has a source. And as we move further into this story, the picture becomes even clearer, because vitamins are only part of the supply chain. Beneath the softer shortages that dim energy from within, there are other missing pieces with a more structural kind of influence, the minerals that help build, stabilise and carry the body in ways we notice only when the support begins to thin. If vitamins often feel like the body's quiet assistants, then minerals are more like its builders, electricians and structural engineers. They are not glamorous, and they do not usually get the same attention as trendy diets, miracle supplements, or whatever brightly packaged powder is currently promising to transform someone into a more radiant version of themselves by Thursday. But minerals are there in the frame, in the wiring, in the blood, in the fluid around the cells, in the tiny gradients that let nerves fire and muscles contract. They help make the body solid, stable and workable, and when they begin to run low, the effects are often felt not as one dramatic illness, but as a gradual loss of support. Things become less steady, less strong, less coordinated, less repairable. The body starts to feel as though parts of it are being held together with weaker fastening. That is why mineral deficiencies can be thought of as the invisible builders going missing from the site. Imagine a house still standing, still occupied, still recognisable as a house, but with fewer maintenance workers arriving each week. The walls are not falling down in one afternoon. Instead, a hinge loosens, a step softens, a pipe rattles, a crack forms where nothing quite fits as well as it used to. In the body, these small signs can look like muscle cramps, brittle nails, poor wound healing, weakness, strange heartbeat sensations, bone discomfort, hair changes, tingling, dental issues, persistent fatigue, low mood, or the feeling that one's general physical sturdiness has become negotiable. None of this sounds especially theatrical, and that is exactly the point. The body often begins its complaints with inconvenience before it moves on to alarm. Minerals are chemical elements the body needs in varying amounts. Some, like calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, magnesium, chloride, and sulfur, are called major minerals because the body uses them in larger quantities. Others, such as iron, zinc, iodine, selenium, copper, manganese, fluoride, chromium, and molybdenum, are trace minerals because they are required in much smaller amounts. But trace should not be mistaken for optional. A small amount can still be essential. The body is full of processes that depend on the presence of just the right mineral in just the right place. Too little, and a system weakens. Too much, and another problem may appear. Biology likes balance. Humans, meanwhile, tend to prefer dramatic swings and strong opinions. What makes mineral deficiencies especially interesting is that many of them affect structure in the broadest possible sense. Not only bones and teeth, though certainly those, but also the structure of blood, the structure of enzymes, the structure of hormones, and the structure of electrical communication itself. A muscle cell depends on mineral gradients, a bone depends on mineral storage, a red blood cell depends on mineral components, a thyroid hormone depends on a mineral ingredient. So when mineral status worsens, the consequences are not confined to one corner of the body. The architecture is everywhere. Calcium is the obvious place to start because it has become almost synonymous with bones. That is fair as far as it goes. The majority of the body's calcium is stored in bones and teeth, where it helps give them strength and rigidity. But calcium is more than scaffolding. It is also involved in muscle contraction, nerve transmission, blood clotting, and cellular signaling. This means calcium is not simply a building block left untouched once the structure is complete. It is an active participant in daily life, constantly moving in tightly regulated ways. The body guards blood calcium very carefully because too much, or too little, can disturb essential functions, especially in nerves and muscles. If dietary calcium intake is too low, or vitamin D is insufficient and calcium absorption falls, the body does not shrug and accept low blood calcium for long. It starts borrowing from the bones. This is practical in the short term and costly in the long term. Bones are treated like a mineral bank, which sounds clever until you remember that withdrawals without deposits eventually become a problem. Over time, inadequate intake or poor absorption can contribute to reduced bone density, osteopenia, osteoporosis, and greater fracture risk. In children, the consequences of calcium and vitamin D problems can include impaired bone development. In adults, there may be bone weakness, fractures, dental issues, or muscle symptoms. But again, the story usually begins earlier and more quietly. A person may notice muscle cramps, twitching, brittle nails, or a general sense of physical fragility. They may feel that their body is not quite as reliable under load. One of the reasons bones are such fascinating tissues is that they are not dead poles holding up a tent. They are living, changing structures. Bone is constantly being broken down and rebuilt. This remodeling helps repair microscopic damage and maintain strength. For that process to work well, the body needs calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, vitamin D, protein, hormones, and more. Bones are less like concrete and more like an active construction site. If key supplies run short, the structure may still stand, but the maintenance quality drops. Tiny deficits accumulate. Repair is less complete. the architecture slowly weakens. Phosphorus, though rarely spoken of with the same enthusiasm as calcium, is just as deeply involved in structure. It combines with calcium in bones and teeth, but it is also central to ATP, the molecule cells use to carry energy. It is part of cell membranes and DNA. A person severely deficient in phosphorus may develop weakness, bone pain, poor appetite, confusion, or respiratory problems, though this is less common and often linked to particular medical conditions or refeeding states. Still, phosphorus reminds us that structure and energy are not separate themes. The body builds and powers itself with overlapping materials. The same mineral can support a skeleton and a cell's ability to function. Magnesium is one of the most underappreciated minerals in the body, perhaps because it does too many things to build a simple public image. It participates in hundreds of enzymatic reactions, supports muscle and nerve function, helps regulate blood sugar, contributes to protein synthesis, and is involved in bone structure. A large portion of magnesium is stored in bone, but its functional presence throughout the body is what makes deficiency so slippery. Low magnesium may show up as muscle cramps, twitches, weakness, tremors, fatigue, irritability, irregular heart rhythms, numbness, or poor sleep. It can make the body feel restless and unstable, as though the electrical system has become slightly overreactive. That overreactivity is not imagined. Magnesium helps regulate ion movement across cell membranes. When it is low, nerves and muscles may become more excitable. This is why magnesium deficiency can feel like the body has become less calm from the inside. Muscles complain, sleep becomes less restorative. The heart may seem more dramatic than anyone asked it to be, and because magnesium also contributes to bone health, long-term shortage can affect both the frame and the function. Once again, the body's systems overlap so thoroughly that one missing builder can leave trouble in several neighbourhoods at once. Potassium is another mineral that rarely gets poetic treatment, though it deserves respect for the amount of stability it provides. Potassium is crucial for fluid balance, nerve signalling, and muscle contraction, including the contraction of the heart. It helps maintain the electrical gradients that allow cells to do what they do. If potassium levels fall too low, weakness, fatigue, muscle cramps, constipation, and dangerous heart rhythm problems can occur. Severe deficiency is especially serious, but even milder low potassium can leave a person feeling oddly depleted, weak, and less physically dependable. The body may feel like it is losing its crispness. Movements become less confident. Muscles tire too quickly. The internal charge is not being held properly. Sodium is often discussed as a villain in popular health advice, but like most things in biology, the truth is more conditional than dramatic. Sodium is essential for fluid balance, nerve function, and muscle contraction. Too much sodium in the wrong context can be a problem, but too little is also dangerous. Low sodium, or hyponatremia, can lead to headache, nausea, confusion, weakness, and in severe cases seizures or coma. It is less often a straightforward deficiency of intake and more often a problem of fluid balance, medications, illness, or endurance exercise with excessive water intake. But it belongs in this structural story because minerals are not only about building tissue, they are also about maintaining the environment in which tissues can function. A body's architecture includes its chemistry. Chloride, often overshadowed by sodium because they frequently travel together as table salt, also helps maintain fluid balance and acid-base balance. It contributes to stomach acid production, which means it supports digestion and, indirectly, nutrient absorption. A body low in chloride may experience weakness, dehydration, and metabolic disturbances. Again, it is one of those quiet background players that only becomes visible when its absence begins to distort the whole set. Iron sits at an interesting crossroads between structure and function. It is not part of bone structure in the same way calcium is, but it is part of hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein in red blood cells, and myoglobin in muscle. In that sense, iron is a builder of blood and a supporter of muscular performance. If iron stores fall, the body first loses some of its margin. Exercise feels harder. The person feels colder, weaker, more breathless. If deficiency deepens into iron deficiency anemia, the blood's oxygen carrying capacity drops, and fatigue becomes one of the most recognizable symptoms in medicine. But iron deficiency can also affect nails, hair, concentration, immunity, and even produce odd cravings, including chewing ice. The body's response to low iron is particularly revealing because oxygen delivery is so fundamental. When iron is scarce, the whole structure of daily living begins to feel less supported. Zinc is another of the invisible builders, though it works on a more microscopic scale. Zinc is needed for immune function, wound healing, DNA synthesis, growth, taste and smell, and the activity of countless enzymes. It is deeply involved in tissue maintenance. A person low in zinc may not first notice structure in the architectural sense. They may notice that cuts heal slowly, that they get sick more often, that food tastes duller, that hair seems thinner, that skin is less healthy, or that appetite has weakened. In children, growth can be impaired. In adults, resilience seems reduced. Zinc deficiency does not usually arrive as a dramatic collapse. It makes the body feel less capable of renewing itself. Repairs take longer, defences are slower, skin and mucosal surfaces become less robust. The maintenance crew is understaffed, and it shows. Copper is a trace mineral with a surprisingly wide range of responsibilities. It helps with iron metabolism, connective tissue formation, nervous system function, and antioxidant defense. Deficiency is uncommon, but when it occurs, it can lead to anemia, neutropenia, bone abnormalities, weakness, and neurological symptoms. Copper matters because enzymes that build and maintain tissues often depend on it. Connective tissues, blood cells, and nervous system integrity are all part of the structural story. When copper is low, the body may become less able to support itself at several levels at once. Selenium, though needed only in tiny amounts, is essential for thyroid hormone metabolism and antioxidant enzymes. It helps protect cells from oxidative damage. Severe deficiency can contribute to heart muscle problems, impaired immunity, and thyroid dysfunction. Here again, the structural theme broadens. A body is not only built from materials, it is protected by maintenance systems that prevent damage from accumulating too quickly. Selenium supports that defense. Without it, cells and tissues may be more vulnerable to wear. Iodine is perhaps one of the clearest examples of a small mineral with enormous systemic consequences. It is required for the production of thyroid hormones, which regulate metabolism, growth, temperature, and development. If iodine is low, thyroid hormone production may fall, leading to goiter and hypothyroidism. In adults, this can mean fatigue, weight gain, cold intolerance, dry skin, constipation, slowed thinking, and a general sense of physical and mental heaviness. In pregnancy and early development, iodine deficiency can have profound consequences because thyroid hormones are critical for brain development. It is another reminder that trace minerals may be tiny in quantity, but not in importance. A shortage of iodine can alter the rhythm of an entire body. Then there are the tissues we notice most often because they are visible and easy to inspect. Hair, skin, nails, teeth. These are not medically trivial, even if they are sometimes treated that way. They are often the early public record of what is happening in private. Brittle nails can reflect iron issues. Hair thinning may relate to iron, zinc, protein, or other nutrient problems. Dental weakness can involve calcium, phosphorus, fluoride, and more. Poor wound healing points towards zinc, vitamin C, protein, or other deficits. Cracks, dryness, fragility, and slow recovery all suggest that the body's supply lines may be under strain. The visible tissues are often where the body shows what it can no longer afford to maintain perfectly. That phrase matters, what it can no longer afford. The body operates with priorities. If minerals are scarce, the system protects immediate survival first. Heart rhythm, nerve conduction, muscle contraction, blood chemistry, brain function. Less urgent things begin to lose support. Hair can thin, nails can weaken, bone density can quietly fall, growth can slow, reproductive function may suffer. The body is practical, not vain. It would rather keep the heart beating than preserve glossy hair. It would rather maintain blood calcium than preserve peak bone mass. And because it is so practical, early deficiency often looks cosmetic or minor when it is actually strategic rationing. This is one reason mineral deficiencies can be difficult to notice in time. They often hide inside normal life. A person who is gradually losing bone density does not feel the bone becoming weaker each week. A person with mildly low magnesium may not immediately suspect it when they feel twitchy, tired, or crampy. A person low in zinc may think they are simply run down. A person low in iodine may assume they are just sluggish. Biology changes slowly enough to become familiar. The abnormal gets folded into the routine. Someone buys a stronger hand cream, a different shampoo, a more supportive pair of shoes, and a second afternoon coffee. Meanwhile, the body continues balancing accounts with less than it needs. Dietary patterns play a large role here, of course, but not in as moralizing a way as people often pretend. Some people fall short because they eat highly processed diets, low in mineral-rich foods like legumes, nuts, seeds, dairy, fish, meat, vegetables, and whole grains. Some avoid major food groups. Some have limited budgets, limited time, limited appetite, limited cooking skills, or limited patience after difficult days. Some have eating disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, chronic illness, or medications that affect absorption or losses. Some lose iron through heavy menstruation. Some lose sodium and potassium through vomiting, diarrhea, or endurance exercise. Some absorb less calcium or magnesium because of intestinal issues. Some people simply get older and the body becomes less efficient at handling the same tasks. Most deficiency stories are not about negligence. They are about real lives meeting biological limits. The relationship between minerals and the digestive system deserves attention because what enters the body is not the same as what is available to the body. Stomach acid helps release certain minerals from food. The small intestine must absorb them. The kidneys help regulate and conserve them. Hormones help direct where they go. If any part of that chain is impaired, shortage can develop. This is why someone can eat a diet that looks good on paper and still end up depleted. It is also why supplementation is sometimes helpful and sometimes not enough. The body structure depends on delivery, not just intention. Bones offer one of the clearest examples of this long, quiet arithmetic. Peak bone mass is built over years, especially in youth and early adulthood. After that, maintenance matters. If intake, absorption, activity, hormones, and general nutrition are not supportive, bone loss can outpace bone building. A person may feel perfectly ordinary for years while the architecture gradually thins. Then one day there is a fracture from a fall that should not have been so consequential. The event feels sudden. The process was not. It was the result of long-term under-support. That is perhaps the central lesson of the invisible builders. Structural weakness often appears only after a very long period of quiet shortage. The same is true for muscles. Minerals help muscles contract, relax, and recover. Calcium triggers contraction. Magnesium helps with relaxation and regulation. Potassium and sodium create the gradients that let muscle cells respond. Phosphorus supports energy transfer. If these systems are under-supported, the muscles may feel crampy, weak, shaky, or prematurely tired. People often describe this as, "My body just doesn't feel right," which is one of the most accurate vague statements a human can make. The structure is still there, but its cooperation has become less reliable. Nerves too depend on mineral balance. Electrical signaling requires precise movement of ions across membranes. Too little potassium, sodium, calcium, or magnesium in the wrong context, and signaling becomes disturbed. Tingling, twitching, weakness, confusion, irritability, even dangerous cardiac or neurological effects can follow. So when we talk about structure, we should think beyond bones and walls. The body's structure includes the charged environment that lets tissues behave like living tissues instead of decorative arrangements of protein. There is something oddly humbling about mineral deficiencies because they show how physical we really are. It is easy to think of strength as motivation, endurance as personality, and resilience as character. Then calcium runs low, or magnesium drifts downward, or iron stores quietly empty, and suddenly the body reminds us that structure is chemistry made visible. Stamina is not only determination, it is oxygen delivery, electrolyte balance, enzyme activity, nerve stability, muscle contraction, and bone integrity. A person may feel as though they are somehow failing at being robust, when in truth, part of the issue is that their internal construction crew has been short on supplies for too long. This does not mean every cramp, weak nail, or tired afternoon is a mineral deficiency. Bodies are too complex for that kind of theatrical certainty. But it does mean that when multiple clues gather, it is worth respecting the possibility that the invisible builders need attention. Structural problems rarely begin with collapse. They begin with subtle compromise, a little less healing, a little less density, a little more weakness, a little less tolerance for strain. Over time, those little changes matter. And perhaps the most important part of all this is that structure is not static. The body can rebuild, replenish, and recover when it has what it needs. Bone can be supported, iron stores can be restored, zinc status can improve, magnesium can return to steadier levels, muscles can feel calmer, wounds can heal faster, the frame can become more trustworthy again. The body is remarkably willing to repair when the materials arrive. It is not unforgiving, it is simply practical. So as we continue, keep that image in mind. A body as a living structure, always under maintenance, always negotiating between what it has and what it needs. Minerals are among the quiet workers that keep the whole place standing. And when they go missing, the signs often appear not as drama, but as reduced support in the places where life depends on steadiness most. Which brings us naturally to one of the clearest examples of what happens when those supports begin to thin, because nowhere is that gradual loss felt more intimately than in the blood itself, where the story of oxygen, iron, and certain vitamins begins to explain why tiredness can feel so much deeper than simple sleepiness. There is ordinary tiredness, and then there is the kind that feels as if something more fundamental has gone missing. Ordinary tiredness usually makes sense. You slept badly, worked too long, worried too much, ate too little, travelled, trained hard, stayed out late, or made the completely human choice to believe that one more episode would not matter, and then discovered at 6:40 in the morning that it had mattered quite a lot. That kind of fatigue is unpleasant, but it still feels connected to life as you know it. It has a cause you can point to. It usually lifts, at least partly, with rest. Then there is another kind, a slower, deeper tiredness, one that does not quite match the schedule or the circumstances, a tiredness that makes even simple exertion feel strangely expensive. Walking upstairs becomes a negotiation. Carrying groceries feels more dramatic than the groceries deserve. The body feels heavy but also weak. The mind feels cloudy but not exactly sleepy. You rest, but the restoration is incomplete. You wake, but not renewed. This is often the fatigue people describe when something is wrong with the blood's ability to deliver oxygen, or with the body's ability to make and maintain healthy red blood cells. And that is where iron and vitamin B12 enter the story, two nutrients whose absence can change not just energy, but the felt experience of being physically alive. To understand why, it helps to begin with the simple fact that oxygen is the body's quiet fuel partner. We often talk about food as energy, which is fair enough, but food cannot be fully turned into usable cellular energy without oxygen. Inside the cells, especially in the mitochondria, oxygen helps make the more efficient production of ATP possible. ATP is the chemical currency cells spend on nearly everything. Muscles use it to contract. The brain uses it to think, signal, and maintain order. The heart uses it to beat with calm regularity, whether or not anyone is appreciating the effort. The whole body depends on a constant supply. Getting oxygen from the air to the tissues is one of the most impressive routine jobs the body performs. You breathe it in, it reaches the lungs, it crosses into the blood. Red blood cells carry it through the circulation. Hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein inside red blood cells, binds oxygen and delivers it where needed. If that chain is weakened anywhere, tissues get less of what they need. Not no oxygen, at least not at first. Just less margin, less capacity, less ease. And when the whole body is working with reduced oxygen delivery, the result is not merely tiredness in the casual sense. It is a kind of internal dimming. Iron is central to this because iron is an essential component of hemoglobin. Without enough iron, the body cannot make hemoglobin properly, and without enough healthy hemoglobin, red blood cells cannot carry oxygen efficiently. This is why iron deficiency is one of the most common nutritional causes of fatigue in the world. The body may still be breathing perfectly well, the lungs may be fine, the heart may be trying faithfully. But the blood cannot carry the same load. Oxygen transport becomes less effective, and the whole system feels it. What makes iron deficiency particularly revealing is that the body often begins adapting long before full anemia appears. Iron is stored mainly as ferritin, and if dietary intake or absorption does not keep up with losses or needs, those stores begin to fall. At first, a person may not have obvious anemia on standard blood counts. Hemoglobin may still be within range. But the stores are thinning, and the body is already working with less reserve. This can produce early symptoms: fatigue, reduced exercise tolerance, difficulty concentrating, headaches, hair shedding, irritability, feeling cold, restless legs, or the peculiar sense that the body no longer handles effort gracefully. By the time iron deficiency progresses to iron deficiency anemia, the person often looks back and realizes they have been drifting downward for quite some time. Anemia, in the simplest sense, means there are too few red blood cells, too little hemoglobin, or red blood cells that are not functioning well enough to carry oxygen as they should. The result is the same basic problem: reduced oxygen delivery to tissues, and tissues do not complain uniformly. Muscles may feel weak, the brain may feel foggy, the heart may beat faster trying to compensate, the skin may look paler, a person may become short of breath more easily, or feel strangely exhausted by tasks that should not be so costly. This is because oxygen is not a luxury. It is woven into every ordinary act. When delivery drops, everyday life becomes harder in ways that are difficult to describe to someone who has never felt it. People with iron deficiency often say things that are more precise than they sound. They do not merely say, "I'm tired." They say, "I feel drained. I feel weak. I feel like I'm walking through mud. I get out of breath so easily. My body just doesn't have anything in it." These are not poetic exaggerations. They are good descriptions of what it feels like when tissues are undersupplied. The muscles are working with less oxygen. The brain is operating with less ease. The heart is compensating. The whole body is trying to do normal life on reduced transport. That compensating is important. The body is not passive in the face of low oxygen-carrying capacity. If anemia develops, the heart often beats faster to move more blood per minute. Breathing may subtly increase. The person may feel palpitations or a racing heart with exertion. They may become lightheaded when standing. They may feel oddly shaky after activity. The body is trying to preserve oxygen delivery by moving blood faster, but compensation has its own cost. It makes effort feel even less comfortable. A short walk may leave someone winded not because they are terribly out of shape, but because their system is having to work too hard for the same result. Pallor is another classic clue. If hemoglobin is low, the skin, nail beds, inner eyelids, and lips may look less pink. But because this change can happen gradually, many people do not notice it in themselves. They simply look a bit washed out in photographs, or are told they look tired. The body often tells the truth through appearance long before the person interprets it correctly. Brittle nails, hair thinning, dry skin, and cracks at the corners of the mouth may also appear. Iron deficiency, in other words, is not only a blood story, it becomes a whole person story because when oxygen delivery suffers, the body begins rationing comfort and maintenance alike. One of the stranger and more memorable symptoms of iron deficiency is pica, the craving for non-food substances. This can include ice, clay, starch, paper, or dirt. Ice chewing, called pagophagia, is particularly associated with iron deficiency. It is an odd symptom because it sounds almost too peculiar to be real, yet it is well known. No one is entirely certain why iron deficiency produces this craving, but it is one of the best examples of the body behaving in ways that seem irrational until biology is taken into account. A person may think they have developed a strange habit. Their body may be leaving a clue. Heavy menstrual bleeding is one of the most common pathways into iron deficiency, especially in women of reproductive age. Blood loss means iron loss, and if intake or absorption does not make up the difference, stores gradually fall. This is such a common pattern that it is easy to underestimate its significance. A person may normalize years of tiredness because their periods have always been heavy and their fatigue has always been there, but always is not the same as normal. The body can adapt to chronic shortage in a way that makes suffering feel familiar. Familiarity is not proof of health. Pregnancy is another important context because iron needs increase significantly. The body is expanding blood volume, supporting the placenta, and building a developing fetus, all of which require resources. If iron stores are low before pregnancy begins, the demands of pregnancy can expose that shortage quickly. Growth in childhood and adolescence also raises demand. So does endurance training, especially in people who undereat, lose iron through sweat or gastrointestinal microbleeding, or have repeated impact stress such as distance running. A body can enter iron shortage not because it is poorly treated, but because its needs have quietly changed, and no one has noticed in time. Absorption matters too. Iron from animal foods, called heme iron, is absorbed more efficiently than non-heme iron from plant foods. Non-heme iron absorption is more sensitive to inhibitors and enhancers. Vitamin C can improve it. Tea, coffee, calcium, and certain compounds in grains and legumes can reduce it. This does not mean plant-based diets are inherently deficient. It means they require attention and planning, especially for people with higher iron needs. Digestive disorders can also reduce absorption, as can conditions affecting stomach acid. Again, the body shortage is not always a moral tale about good food and bad food. Often it is a practical story about supply, demand, and access. Now, B12 enters this oxygen story from a slightly different angle. Vitamin B12 is not part of hemoglobin the way iron is, but it is essential for the formation of healthy red blood cells. Without enough B12, DNA synthesis is impaired, especially in rapidly dividing cells like those in the bone marrow that produce blood cells. The marrow begins making red blood cells that are abnormally large and dysfunctional. This is called megaloblastic anemia. The result, once again, is reduced oxygen delivery and fatigue. But B12 adds something particularly important to the story: the nervous system. A person with B12 deficiency may initially present just like someone with any other anemia: tired, pale, weak, short of breath, foggy, unable to exercise like they used to. But over time, they may also develop tingling in the hands and feet, numbness, burning sensations, balance problems, memory changes, mood changes, and cognitive slowing. That combination can make B12 deficiency feel especially unsettling because it blurs the line between physical exhaustion and neurological change. A person may begin by thinking, "I'm run down," and gradually find themselves wondering why they are forgetful, clumsy, or strangely unsteady. The body is not simply low on fuel. Parts of the wiring are also under threat. This is one of the reasons B12 deficiency deserves respect. The fatigue can be severe, but the neurological effects may persist if the deficiency is prolonged. That is why catching it matters. B12 is necessary for myelin maintenance, the protective covering around nerves that helps signals travel properly. If B12 remains low for too long, nerve damage can become significant. So the tiredness of B12 deficiency is never only tiredness. It is part of a broader pattern of impaired renewal in tissues that depend on proper DNA synthesis and nerve maintenance. B12 deficiency also teaches a useful lesson about the complexity of nutrition, because a person can consume foods containing B12 and still become deficient if absorption is impaired. B12 absorption is a multi-step process. It must be released from food in the stomach, bind to intrinsic factor, and then be absorbed in the terminal ileum of the small intestine. Problems with stomach acid, autoimmune destruction of intrinsic factor, intestinal disease, surgery, medications such as long-term acid suppression or metformin, and aging can all interfere. People who avoid animal products entirely can also develop deficiency if they do not use fortified foods or supplements. So here again, the body's fatigue is not always a sign of poor eating. Sometimes it is a sign that the machinery of absorption has become unreliable. Because B12 deficiency can develop slowly, people often adapt to it in stages. They become more tired and less mentally sharp. Their mood flattens. Their feet feel odd. They stop exercising because they just don't have it lately. They misplace words or thoughts and blame stress. They notice they sway a bit in the dark or stumble more than they used to. None of this seems dramatic enough to force a clear conclusion, especially when it develops over months or years, but the body has been trying to speak all along. It is just that slow damage often sounds like ordinary life until someone finally checks the right thing. Folate too belongs briefly in this oxygen story because it shares B12's role in DNA synthesis and red blood cell production. Folate deficiency can also cause megaloblastic anemia, with fatigue, weakness, pallor and shortness of breath. In some cases, folate deficiency and B12 deficiency overlap, especially in people with poor overall intake, alcoholism, malabsorption or increased needs, but there is an important clinical nuance. Giving folate can improve the anemia of B12 deficiency while allowing the neurological damage of untreated B12 deficiency to continue. The blood may look better while the nerves quietly worsen. It is one of those details that reminds us how carefully the body's systems interlock and how unwise it can be to assume that one improvement means the whole story has been solved. What constant fatigue so often does to a person, beyond the physical symptoms, is narrow their life. This may sound obvious, but it matters. When oxygen delivery is compromised, the world gets smaller. People stop making plans, they sit more, they dread stairs. They avoid exercise not because they are unmotivated, but because effort feels punishing. Social energy shrinks along with physical energy. Work becomes harder, concentration weakens, mood darkens. And because the fatigue is not always visible, people around them may misunderstand. They may hear, "You just need to sleep more," or "You need to push through it," when what the body actually needs is not more willpower, but restored blood-building capacity. There is something particularly lonely about anemia-related fatigue because it can be hard to explain. People who have only known ordinary tiredness often imagine fatigue as a stronger version of sleepiness. But the feeling of low oxygen carrying capacity is different. It is not just wanting a nap. It is the body's activities losing their power supply. The muscles do not want to continue. The brain does not want to focus. The heart complains. The person can feel both exhausted and physically uncomfortable in movement, which creates a feedback loop. The less they do, the more deconditioned they may become. The more deconditioned they become, the harder exertion feels. The The original nutrient problem begins to reshape the whole pattern of living. The body also prioritizes cleverly in these situations. If oxygen delivery is limited, non-essential functions lose polish first. Hair may thin, nails may become brittle, skin may look dull, hands and feet may feel cold because the body preserves core function. Cognitive clarity may soften because the brain, though protected, still feels reduced supply. Exercise tolerance drops because muscles under exertion reveal the deficit more than quiet sitting does. That is why some people say they feel fine at rest but terrible with activity. Rest does not challenge the system enough to expose the shortage. Stairs do. In children, iron and B12 deficiencies can have broader developmental implications because growth and brain development are active, ongoing, and expensive processes. A shortage during these years does not merely cause tiredness. It can affect learning, attention, behavior, and development. In older adults, the consequences may be hidden behind assumptions about aging. Fatigue, weakness, slowed thinking, balance trouble, and pallor can be dismissed as age itself, when nutritional deficiency may be a substantial contributor. Once again, the body is often blamed for being old, lazy, stressed, hormonal, or difficult, when part of the truth is simply that it does not have what it needs to build healthy blood and support healthy nerves. It is also worth noting that the sensation of being short of breath in anemia is not necessarily a lung problem. This confuses people because breathlessness feels respiratory. But if hemoglobin is low, breathing can feel unsatisfying because the blood cannot carry oxygen efficiently, even if the lungs are functioning reasonably well. The body tries to compensate by increasing breathing rate, especially on exertion. So a person may feel winded, panicked, or chest heavy, even when the deeper issue lies in the blood's transport system. It is one of those times when the symptom points to one place and the cause lives in another, and then there is the emotional effect. Low iron and low B12 can both contribute to low mood, poor concentration, irritability, and cognitive changes. Some of this is direct, especially in the case of B12 and the nervous system. Some is indirect, because a body that is chronically exhausted becomes less emotionally resilient. It is hard to feel hopeful, patient, or socially open when even basic functioning feels like effort. This is one of the reasons nutrition and mental life can never be fully separated. A person may think they are losing motivation or becoming less themselves, when part of the change is that the chemistry of oxygen delivery and tissue support has quietly deteriorated. The reassuring part of this story, when deficiency truly is the cause, is that the body often responds gratefully to correction. Iron stores can be rebuilt, hemoglobin can recover, B12 can be replenished, blood cells can return to healthier form. Neurological symptoms may improve, especially if recognized early. Energy does not usually return overnight, and in some cases the underlying cause must also be addressed, such as blood loss, malabsorption, or dietary insufficiency. But the body is willing to recover when given the chance. People often describe that recovery in very simple terms. The stairs stop feeling impossible, the headaches ease, the mind sharpens, the coldness lessens, the world becomes bigger again. What is most striking about the oxygen story is that it shows how much of vitality depends on invisible delivery. We like to think energy is something we produce by effort or attitude, but much of what we call energy is actually transport. Oxygen carried faithfully, minute by minute, cell by cell, by blood that has been built properly from the right materials. If iron is low, the transport system weakens. If B12 is low, the blood itself may be built incorrectly and the nerves may suffer too. The result is not theatrical collapse, at least not at first. It is constant fatigue, the sort that seeps into everything because oxygen is needed by everything. So when the body begins to feel persistently drained, it is worth remembering that tiredness is not one thing. Sometimes it is rest that is missing. Sometimes it is oxygen carrying capacity. Sometimes it is a vitamin that helps make blood or preserve nerves. Sometimes it is multiple shortages overlapping until a person can no longer tell where ordinary life ends and deficiency begins. And once you start to understand fatigue this way, not as weakness of character, but as a possible sign of impaired delivery and poor cellular support, the body's clues become more coherent, which matters because blood is only one part of the chemical conversation. Beyond oxygen and fatigue lies another set of quiet regulators, minerals that influence hormones themselves and determine whether the body can keep its larger messages balanced, steady, and believable. The body is full of messages that never make a sound. No little bell rings when the thyroid slows. No quiet chime announces that wound healing has become less efficient, that appetite has changed, that taste feels flatter, that the skin is taking longer to repair itself, or that the mind feels just slightly dimmer and slower than it used to. Hormones travel silently. Minerals do too, yet between them they govern an astonishing amount of daily life. Warmth, energy, metabolism, growth, recovery, appetite, mood, fertility, immune function, the pace of thought itself. When these systems are balanced, they feel almost invisible. Life simply moves. But when key nutrients are missing, especially ones involved in hormone production and regulation, the body begins to drift. It still functions, but the rhythm changes. The chemistry loses some of its balance. That is what makes iodine and zinc so interesting. They are not usually the first nutrients people think of when they imagine feeling unwell. Iron gets more attention. Vitamin D has become a modern celebrity. Magnesium is discussed with a certain whispered intensity in wellness circles. But iodine and zinc are among the quiet regulators. They do not merely support one obvious tissue or one dramatic symptom. They influence systems that affect almost everything. And because they work through hormones, enzymes, and signaling, their absence often shows up as a kind of whole-person shift rather than one neat complaint. To understand this, it helps to begin with the thyroid, a small gland with an influence wildly out of proportion to its size. The thyroid sits in the front of the neck and produces hormones that help regulate metabolism. That word, metabolism, tends to get flattened into vague internet chatter about calories and body weight, but in real biology, it means something much broader and far more interesting. Metabolism is the sum of the body's chemical processes. It is how quickly cells use energy, how much heat is produced, how active tissues are, how quickly systems turn over, how much fuel is burned, how alert or sluggish the organism feels. Thyroid hormones are not the only regulators of these things, but they are among the most important. When thyroid hormone levels are appropriate, the body's internal tempo tends to feel right. When they are too low, life slows. When they are too high, life speeds up in exhausting ways. Iodine is essential to this story because thyroid hormones cannot be made without it. The hormones thyroxine and triiodothyronine, usually called T4 and T3, literally contain iodine in their structure. Without iodine, the thyroid cannot produce adequate amounts of these hormones. The gland may try harder. It may enlarge under the stimulation of thyroid-stimulating hormone from the pituitary. This enlargement is what we call a goiter. But effort cannot fully replace supply. If iodine remains low, thyroid hormone production falls, and the entire system begins to feel slower, heavier, colder, and less responsive. This is one of the clearest examples of how a trace mineral can shape the experience of being alive. Iodine deficiency is not just a missing nutrient, it becomes a shift in tempo. People may feel tired, but not in the same way as someone with iron deficiency. Iron deficiency often feels like reduced oxygen transport, weakness, breathlessness, and physical depletion. Low thyroid function from iodine deficiency can feel more like internal slowing. The mind feels less quick, the body feels chilled, skin becomes dry, bowels slow down, weight may rise, mood may flatten. Energy is low but in a heavy, steady way, as though the whole organism has been placed on a dimmer setting. What is especially deceptive about this process is that it often unfolds gradually. A person may not wake up one morning and declare, "My thyroid-driven metabolism has softened in a clinically meaningful way." They more often say things like, "I've just been feeling off. I'm always cold lately. My skin is terrible. I can't think clearly. I'm tired no matter what. I'm gaining weight and I don't understand why. Everything feels slow." And because those symptoms are so common and so easy to blame on stress, aging, poor sleep, or life itself, iodine-related thyroid dysfunction can settle in quietly. The thyroid is also part of a hierarchy. The hypothalamus speaks to the pituitary speaks to the thyroid then releases hormones that affect tissues throughout the body. This means a shortage of iodine in the diet becomes, through that chain, a whole-body communication problem. The gland may receive the signal to work harder, but if the raw material is missing, the message cannot be fully turned into action. It is like sending repeated instructions to a factory that has run out of a key part. Everyone in management may be doing their best. The product still cannot be made properly. In adults, this slowing can be miserable enough. In pregnancy and childhood, it becomes even more consequential. Thyroid hormones are crucial for brain development and growth. Severe iodine deficiency during pregnancy can affect fetal development profoundly. In infancy and early childhood, inadequate iodine can impair growth and intellectual development. This is one reason iodine deficiency has historically been such a major public health issue in some parts of the world, and why iodized salt became such an important intervention. It is one of the quiet success stories of nutrition, so effective that it can make people forget why it mattered in the first place. And yet iodine deficiency has not disappeared everywhere, nor is it impossible in modern life. It can occur in people who avoid iodized salt, eat very limited diets, have low intake of dairy, seafood or other iodine-containing foods, or live in regions where soil iodine is low and food iodine content reflects that. Extreme dietary restriction, food trends that encourage unfortified specialty salts, and simple lack of awareness can all play a role. The thyroid does not care whether the reason is fashionable or accidental. It cares whether iodine arrives. The idea of balance matters here because hormones are not about maximum speed, they are about the right speed. Too little thyroid hormone slows the body. Too much can create anxiety, heat intolerance, weight loss, tremor, palpitations, and restlessness. This is true of endocrine systems more broadly. Hormonal health is not about dramatic enhancement, it is about appropriate regulation. The body does not want to be amplified like a concert. It wants to be tuned like an instrument. That tuning depends on more than iodine alone, and this is where zinc enters with its usual quiet competence. Zinc is involved in hundreds of enzymatic reactions. It supports growth, immune function, wound healing, cell division, protein synthesis, taste and smell, skin integrity, reproductive function, and more. It also has important roles in hormone biology. Zinc contributes to thyroid hormone metabolism, insulin storage and action, reproductive hormones, and the proper functioning of numerous receptors and transcription factors. In short, zinc helps the body not only build and repair tissues, but also interpret and act on chemical messages. This makes zinc deficiency especially subtle in its effects. A body low in zinc may not display one dominant dramatic syndrome right away. Instead, it may become less resilient across several systems at once. Wounds heal more slowly, skin may become rougher or more prone to rash, taste and smell may dull, appetite may drop, hair may thin, immune defenses weaken, children may grow more slowly, men may experience changes in testosterone-related function or fertility. The body feels less good at being itself. That phrase may sound imprecise, but it is often how real physiology presents. A nutrient involved in so many basic regulatory processes leaves a diffuse absence when it goes missing. Zinc is particularly interesting because it influences how cells communicate with genes. Many proteins that bind DNA and regulate gene expression rely on structures called zinc fingers. That means zinc is not merely a helpful extra floating around the edges. It is involved in the literal machinery by which cells interpret instructions. It supports the body's ability to respond appropriately, build appropriately, divide appropriately, and repair appropriately. If iodine is essential for making thyroid hormone, zinc is part of the broader infrastructure that helps hormone-regulated biology make sense and proceed efficiently. One of the simplest but most revealing symptoms of zinc deficiency is impaired wound healing. Healing is one of those processes people do not think about until it becomes noticeably slower. A cut that lingers, skin that does not seem to recover, mouth ulcers that recur, scratches that remain red for too long. These are small events, but they reveal a great deal. Healing requires cell division, protein synthesis, immune coordination, collagen formation, and local signaling. If zinc is low, that orchestration becomes less effective. The body is still trying, it just has fewer tools. Taste and smell are another elegant clue. Zinc deficiency can reduce the sensitivity of these senses, which in turn can lower appetite. Food becomes less vivid. Eating becomes less interesting. The person may unintentionally eat less or lose interest in balanced meals because everything feels somewhat dull. This can create a feedback loop. Lower intake worsens the deficiency. The deficiency further impairs appetite. The body begins to live inside a shrinking nutritional circle. It is one of those strange biological loops where the shortage itself makes correction less likely without intervention. Zinc also matters for the immune system in ways that are broad rather than flashy. A person low in zinc may seem to catch things more easily, recover more slowly, or feel like every small illness takes too much out of them. This is partly because immune cells depend on zinc for development and function. The body's defenses are not purely muscular or heroic. They are built from chemistry and organization. A mineral shortage can weaken that organization. The result is not just more illness, but less confidence in recovery. The relationship between zinc and hormones becomes especially visible in growth and reproduction. In children and adolescents, zinc deficiency can impair growth and sexual maturation. In adults, low zinc may contribute to issues in fertility, testosterone metabolism, and reproductive health more broadly. This does not mean every hormonal complaint is a zinc issue, of course. Human beings are far too complex for such neat single explanations. But it does mean that the body's endocrine conversation depends in part on having enough of the small mineral components that make signaling effective. Thyroid hormone itself also interacts with zinc. Some research and clinical observation suggest that zinc status may affect the conversion of T4 to the more active T3, though this is part of a larger network involving selenium, overall nutrition, liver function, and more. The point is not to flatten everything into one mineral miracle. The point is that endocrine function is collaborative. Glands do not work in isolation, and neither do nutrients. A thyroid hormone molecule may begin with iodine, but its influence across the body depends on tissues that are well nourished enough to receive, convert, and act on those hormonal signals appropriately. Selenium deserves a brief mention here because it sits quietly near the thyroid story as well. Selenium is necessary for enzymes involved in thyroid hormone metabolism and antioxidant protection within the thyroid gland. This means the thyroid needs not only iodine to produce hormone, but also selenium to help manage and activate it safely. Again, the endocrine system refuses to be simple. It is not enough to have one ingredient if several are needed to handle the whole process cleanly. What makes hormonal nutrient deficiencies especially hard to notice is that their symptoms often masquerade as personality or lifestyle problems. Low thyroid function from inadequate iodine or related issues may make someone seem lazy, low motivation, overly sleepy, or mentally slow, when in fact the body's metabolic tempo is reduced. Zinc deficiency may leave someone looking chronically run down, dull-skinned, under-recovered, or disinterested in food, and all of that can be read as vague poor health rather than a clue to specific nutrient imbalance. This is one of the recurring themes in the body's language. It does not always say, "I am deficient in zinc." It more often says, "I am not recovering properly and I do not have the resources to explain myself more clearly." There is also a reason endocrine symptoms often feel emotional as well as physical. Hormones do not merely affect the body below the neck. Thyroid hormones influence brain function, alertness, mood, and cognition. Zinc contributes to neurotransmission and brain chemistry. When these systems are off, a person may not only feel tired or physically changed, they may feel unlike themselves. More foggy, more irritable, more flat, less engaged, less mentally nimble. It becomes difficult to tell where body ends and mind begins because in truth there was never a sharp line. The chemistry of balance reaches both. This is particularly important in a modern culture that often turns every feeling state into a psychological narrative. If someone is tired, slowed, low, or scattered, they may assume it must be stress, burnout, depression, or a flaw in discipline. Sometimes it is one or more of those things. But sometimes biology belongs at the table too. A body low in key nutrients may produce a mental atmosphere that feels emotional but is partly chemical. The mind is being asked to function through a body whose regulatory systems are undersupplied. It would be strange if that had no psychological effect. The skin often records these shifts before the intellect does. In low thyroid states, skin may become dry, rough, cool, and pale. Hair may thin. The outer eyebrows may lose density. In zinc deficiency, skin may develop rashes, acne-like lesions, poor healing, or areas of irritation, especially around body openings in more severe cases. Nails may weaken. Hair may lose vigour. These are visible signs of altered maintenance, altered turnover, altered hormonal and enzymatic support. The body surface becomes a summary of inner chemistry. Temperature sensitivity is another revealing clue. People with low thyroid hormone often feel cold when others do not. This is not weakness of character, poor optimism, or a decorative preference for blankets. It reflects a slower metabolic rate and reduced heat production. The body is not generating warmth at the same pace. Once again, endocrine chemistry becomes lived experience in a deeply ordinary way. The person is not imagining it. Their cells are running differently. Constipation, too, belongs here because digestive motility is influenced by thyroid function. In hypothyroid states, the bowels may move more slowly. Food feels heavier. The whole digestive rhythm becomes more sluggish. This can subtly worsen nutritional problems further if appetite, absorption, or food choices begin to shift. The body is a network, not a stack of disconnected drawers. Slow metabolism can influence digestion, which influences intake, which influences nutrient status, which further shapes metabolism. Problems rarely travel alone. Zinc deficiency can affect appetite from another angle. If taste and smell are dulled, pleasure from food falls. If appetite drops, intake may shrink. If protein intake drops, healing and hormone production may further suffer. If immune resilience falls, frequent illness may suppress appetite again. Small shifts compound. Nutritional decline often proceeds not through one catastrophic event, but through overlapping minor losses that reinforce one another until the body's balance becomes difficult to recover without deliberate attention. It is also worth saying that balance does not always mean deficiency alone. Hormone systems can be disrupted by excesses, toxins, autoimmune processes, chronic illness, stress, medications, inflammation, and genetics. Not every thyroid problem is caused by iodine shortage. Not every poor wound healer is zinc deficient, but iodine and zinc are among the nutritional pieces that make the system possible, and without them the chemistry of balance becomes much harder to maintain. There is a certain humility in this. People often imagine hormones as dramatic rulers of the body, issuing powerful invisible commands, and in a sense they are. But even the mightiest hormonal message still depends on basic materials. A gland cannot create hormone from nothing. A receptor cannot function well without the right surrounding chemistry. A cell cannot interpret instructions cleanly without the minerals and enzymes that support transcription, repair, and responsiveness. Great biological messages still rely on tiny physical ingredients. This is why small deficiencies can produce disproportionately large feelings. A little iodine shortage may become slowed metabolism. A little zinc shortage may become impaired healing, dull appetite, poorer immunity, and altered growth or reproductive function. The body is not overreacting. It is revealing how interconnected its systems really are. The chemistry of balance depends on many quiet agreements being kept at once, and when those agreements are restored, the effect can be remarkably ordinary in the best possible way. The person feels warmer again. Thought speeds up a little. Bowel habits normalize. Skin recovers. Appetite returns. Food tastes brighter. Cuts heal properly. Hair settles. Energy becomes steadier. Nothing theatrical happens. The body simply regains its ability to regulate itself without so much strain. Often that is what health feels like. Not excitement, but ease. So as we continue, it helps to remember that deficiencies are not only about energy in the narrow sense or structure in the visible sense. They are also about regulation, about whether the body's messages can be made, sent, received, and acted upon with enough clarity. Iodine and zinc belong to that quieter layer of health, the layer where hormones set tempo and tissues decide whether they can keep up. And once you begin to see how much mood, clarity, appetite, warmth, healing, and resilience depend on that silent chemistry, it becomes easier to understand why the body can feel so different when only a few small but essential pieces go missing. Because after hormones have set the pace, there is still one more place where deficiency reveals itself with particular intimacy, in the mind itself, where nutrients shape focus, memory, mood, and the fragile steadiness of thought. It is easy to talk about the brain as though it were somehow separate from the rest of the body, a noble command centre floating above the ordinary business of digestion, blood, hormones, and nutrient supply. We speak as if memory were a matter of character, focus a matter of discipline, mood a matter of outlook, and of course those things do matter. Experience matters, sleep matters, stress matters, habits matter, but the brain is still tissue. Very active tissue, expensive tissue, demanding tissue. It runs on blood flow, oxygen, electrical gradients, neurotransmitters, cell membranes, enzyme reactions, and a long list of nutrients quietly arriving on time. When those nutrients fall short, the mind often begins to change in ways that feel personal but are partly physical. Thought becomes harder to hold. Mood becomes less stable. Memory seems less reliable. The person may feel as though they are somehow losing clarity, patience, sharpness, or even themselves, when in fact part of the problem is that the organ doing all the thinking is being undersupplied. This is one of the more important and more easily misunderstood aspects of nutrient deficiency. The body can announce shortage through skin, nails, muscles, blood, or bones, and people are often willing to accept that as biology. But when shortage begins to affect concentration, emotional resilience, motivation, or memory, people often interpret it as a psychological problem first and a physical one only much later. Sometimes they are right. The mind has its own genuine sufferings, but the brain is never operating outside chemistry. A shortage of key nutrients can change the conditions under which thought happens, and that changes the experience of being a person from the inside. The brain is a greedy organ in the most understandable sense. Though it makes up only a small percentage of body weight, it uses a large share of the body's energy at rest. It requires constant glucose delivery under normal conditions, steady oxygen, tightly regulated electrolytes, adequate blood flow, and the raw materials to synthesize neurotransmitters, maintain myelin, repair membranes, and manage oxidative stress. It is always busy. Even in sleep it is busy. Even when you're trying to relax, it is often doing an impressively poor job of relaxing. The point is that there is no real pause in cerebral demand. If the supply system becomes strained, the brain usually notices. Iron is a good place to begin because people often associate it only with anemia and fatigue, when in truth iron also matters for the brain. Iron helps support oxygen delivery, which the brain depends on constantly, but it also contributes to neurotransmitter synthesis and cellular energy metabolism. A person with low iron may feel mentally dull, unfocused, irritable, or less able to sustain attention, even before anemia becomes severe. The brain under low iron is not simply tired. It is trying to function with reduced support in both oxygen transport and certain aspects of chemical signaling. This can show up as brain fog, poor concentration, lower work capacity, and in children especially, changes in attention, behaviour and learning. Brain fog is one of those phrases that sounds vague until someone has felt it. It does not usually mean confusion in the dramatic sense. It means thoughts are slower to arrive and harder to keep. Language feels a little farther away. Tasks that normally require mild effort now require real effort. Working memory seems less cooperative. A person may read the same sentence twice, walk into a room and forget why they went there, or lose the thread of simple planning. They're awake, but not mentally crisp. Nutrient deficiencies can create exactly this atmosphere, not because the person has become lazy or careless, but because the brain is functioning under poorer conditions than usual. Vitamin B12 is one of the most important nutrients in this conversation because it supports both red blood cell formation and the nervous system directly. B12 deficiency can affect myelin, the insulating material around nerves that helps signals travel properly. It also affects DNA synthesis, and therefore tissues with rapid turnover, including the bone marrow. The result can be a combination of fatigue, pallor, weakness, numbness, tingling, balance problems, irritability, memory changes, depression, and cognitive slowing. What makes B12 deficiency so striking is that it can look psychiatric, neurological, or hematological, depending on which symptoms show themselves most clearly first. A person may come in complaining of tiredness and low mood. Another may complain of tingling feet and poor balance. Another may mainly feel forgetful and mentally slowed. In each case, the deficiency is working through both blood and nerve function, changing how the mind is experienced. The memory changes of B12 deficiency deserve attention because they can be quietly frightening. People may begin to misplace words, lose confidence in their recall, or feel that they are not thinking as clearly as they used to. In older adults, this can be especially unsettling because both the individual and those around them may assume it is simply aging. Sometimes it is partly that, but sometimes B12 deficiency is contributing in a meaningful and reversible way. The brain does not appreciate shortages in the materials required to maintain nerves and support healthy blood. It may remain outwardly functional for a long time, but the quality of thought declines. Folate too is central to mental function, though it is often reduced in popular conversation to pregnancy and red blood cells. Folate helps with DNA synthesis and cell division, but it also participates in 1-carbon metabolism, which is involved in neurotransmitter synthesis and methylation pathways that affect brain chemistry. Folate deficiency can contribute to megaloblastic anemia, which causes fatigue and poor concentration through reduced oxygen delivery, but it may also be associated with low mood, irritability, and cognitive dullness. A person low in folate may not only feel physically run down, they may feel emotionally blunted or mentally less agile. When fatigue, low mood, and poor focus arrive together, it can be difficult to know where the blood story ends and the brain story begins. In truth, they usually overlap. Vitamin B6 belongs in this mental conversation because it helps synthesize neurotransmitters including serotonin, dopamine, GABA, and others involved in mood regulation and neural signaling. It also contributes to hemoglobin formation. That means B6 deficiency can create a double burden: poorer blood support and altered neurotransmitter production. People may feel tired, irritable, depressed, anxious, mentally flat or more neurologically uncomfortable, sometimes with peripheral symptoms like tingling or mouth soreness as well. Again, the pattern is revealing. The body does not separate emotional resilience from nutrient chemistry nearly as strictly as modern conversation often does. Thiamine, vitamin B1, is another nutrient with a special relationship to the brain. Because thiamine is crucial for energy metabolism, tissues with high metabolic demand, especially the brain, are vulnerable to deficiency. Early thiamine shortage can look like fatigue, irritability, poor concentration, and low appetite. More severe deficiency can lead to major neurological problems, including Wernicke encephalopathy and Korsakoff syndrome, particularly in the setting of alcoholism or profound nutritional compromise. But long before such severe states, the brain may already be showing strain. The person becomes mentally less sturdy, thoughts feel less organized, mood becomes more brittle. It is a reminder that the brain's elegance depends on very basic metabolic housekeeping being adequately supplied. Niacin, vitamin B3, has an equally revealing history. Severe deficiency causes pellagra, remembered classically for dermatitis, diarrhea, and dementia. That word, dementia, may sound extreme, but it points to a crucial truth. When energy metabolism is significantly impaired, the brain changes. Cognitive symptoms, apathy, irritability, depression, confusion, and eventually serious neuropsychiatric changes can occur. Even in milder states of poor nutritional adequacy, low niacin intake is part of a broader pattern in which brain function may feel less robust. The cells are still trying to maintain themselves, but the chemistry is less forgiving. Iron, B12, folate, B6, thiamine, niacin. Already a pattern is forming. Many nutrients that affect the mind do so through more than one route. They may support oxygen delivery, neurotransmitter synthesis, nerve integrity, DNA synthesis, membrane maintenance, or energy production. Deficiency therefore rarely produces a single clean symptom. It creates a kind of cognitive weather, a little more fog, a little less recall, a little less emotional bandwidth, a slightly lower threshold for frustration, a flatter reward response, more trouble staying with tasks. These are easy to mistake for personality or circumstance because they are woven into ordinary life. Yet they can have distinctly nutritional roots. Iodine belongs here too because thyroid hormone has enormous influence on the brain. When iodine deficiency contributes to low thyroid hormone production, mental changes often follow. People may feel slowed, foggy, less motivated, more forgetful, or emotionally flat. It can become harder to think quickly, retrieve words, stay mentally warm and engaged with the world. Severe iodine deficiency during development is especially damaging because the developing brain depends heavily on thyroid hormones. In adults, the changes are subtler, but they matter. A person who says, "I just don't feel mentally awake anymore," may be describing the lived experience of hormonal slowing driven by nutrient shortage. Zinc also shapes the brain in quieter ways than most people realize. Zinc participates in neurotransmission, gene expression, immune regulation, and cellular growth and repair. It is found in high concentrations in parts of the brain involved in memory and emotion. Low zinc has been associated with low mood, poor appetite, reduced sensory pleasure from food, and impaired resilience. Zinc deficiency is rarely the sole explanation for a complex emotional life, but it can contribute to the biological side of feeling low, run down, or mentally underpowered. A body that heals more slowly, fights off illness less effectively, and enjoys food less is a body living under subtly poorer emotional conditions too. Magnesium deserves a long pause because it is one of those nutrients people often mention without fully appreciating why it matters. Magnesium participates in hundreds of reactions and helps regulate nerve and muscle function, energy production, and the movement of calcium and potassium across cell membranes. In the brain, magnesium influences excitability. When levels are low, the nervous system may become more reactive. This can show up as irritability, poor sleep, headaches, anxiety-like symptoms, muscle tension, restlessness, or a general feeling that the body and mind cannot settle properly. Magnesium deficiency does not usually create one neat syndrome called "you are low on magnesium." It creates a state in which calm is harder to sustain. That matters because mood is not only about emotion, it is also about arousal level, sleep quality, muscle tension, and whether the nervous system feels defended or overstimulated. A person low in magnesium may not necessarily say, "My mineral-dependent neuronal regulation is impaired." They more often say, "I feel wired and tired. I can't relax. I'm exhausted, but I can't sleep properly. My body feels tense." Those experiences sit at the border of psychology and physiology, which is exactly where much of real life happens. Vitamin D is another nutrient whose mental effects are often discussed, sometimes too loosely and sometimes not enough. Vitamin D receptors are present in the brain, and low vitamin D has been associated with low mood, cognitive issues, and a general sense of poor vitality. It is not a magical cure for every emotional difficulty, and the internet has a tiresome habit of turning every association into a miracle claim. But low vitamin D can absolutely coexist with fatigue, muscle weakness, low mood, and reduced resilience in a way that makes the whole person feel dimmer. Part of the reason is probably indirect. A body that feels physically weak and under-recovered is a harder body in which to feel emotionally buoyant. But part may also reflect more direct roles in brain and immune function. The mind is affected both by what the brain is chemically experiencing and by what the body as a whole feels like to live in. Omega-3 fatty acids are not vitamins or minerals, but they belong briefly in this conversation because the brain is rich in fat, and cell membranes depend on the right kinds of fatty acids for flexibility and function. DHA in particular is important in neuronal membranes. Poor intake of omega-3s does not create a classic deficiency syndrome in the same way as scurvy or pellagra, but lower intake may influence mood, inflammation, and brain function. Again, the pattern holds. The mind depends not just on ideas but on materials. Choline also deserves mention for similar reasons. It is needed for acetylcholine synthesis, membrane structure, and methylation. Low choline intake may matter for cognitive function and liver health, especially in certain life stages like pregnancy. The more one studies the brain nutritionally, the less mysterious it becomes that mood and memory are vulnerable to supply problems. The brain is a biological organ doing electrical and chemical work at extraordinary speed. Of course, it notices when supplies are inconsistent. Electrolytes can shape the mind as well. Sodium that falls too low can lead to headache, confusion, lethargy, irritability, and in severe cases seizures or coma. Potassium and calcium disturbances can affect nerves and muscles in ways that indirectly or directly alter mental state. Dehydration, though not a nutrient deficiency in the classic sense, can also reduce concentration and mood. These examples help correct a common illusion. Not every problem of thought is lofty. Sometimes clarity depends on very plain physical conditions being met. One of the reasons nutrient-related mental changes are so often missed is that they overlap so closely with stress, and stress is everywhere. People are sleeping badly, working too much, scrolling too late, grieving, worrying, overcommitting, under-resting, and trying to remain mentally intact while their devices politely demand attention every 11 seconds. In that context, nutrient deficiency can hide beautifully. The person is tired and foggy, so they assume it must be modern life. And often modern life is indeed part of the problem, but poor diet, restricted intake, malabsorption, low iron stores, low B12, inadequate folate, low magnesium, poor vitamin D status, thyroid-related nutrient issues and other shortages can all join the stress and make the mind feel significantly worse than stress alone would explain. This overlap can become a vicious cycle. When someone is mentally depleted, they often eat worse. Meal planning becomes harder. Appetite becomes less reliable. Highly processed convenience foods win more often because they demand less effort. Alcohol or caffeine may increase. Sleep worsens. the body receives fewer of the very nutrients that help support mental stability. Then mood and cognition decline further. The problem is no longer simply that the mind is stressed. The mind is stressed inside a body with shrinking reserves. Alcohol provides an especially clear example of this downward spiral. Heavy alcohol use can interfere with the absorption and metabolism of multiple nutrients, including thiamine, folate, B6, magnesium, and others. It can suppress appetite and damage tissues involved in nutrient handling. The result may be a person who looks emotionally unstable, mentally slowed, or chronically run down, when part of what is happening is straightforward nutritional injury layered onto everything else. The brain under those conditions is not merely coping with life, it is operating with missing tools. Older adults are another group in whom nutrient-related changes in the mind can be overlooked. Appetite may decrease, absorption may worsen, medications may interfere, and social factors can reduce dietary quality. At the same time, forgetfulness, low mood, slowed thinking, and fatigue may be written off as age. But age is not a diagnosis. Sometimes the aging brain is also a poorly nourished brain. B12 deficiency is especially important here, but so are vitamin D, folate, magnesium, and broader protein energy intake. A person cannot think sharply forever on shrinking intake and compromised absorption simply because a calendar has advanced. Children and adolescents are vulnerable in another way. Their brains are still developing, and their cognitive and emotional lives are built on a biological foundation that is still under construction. Iron deficiency in children can affect attention, behavior, learning, and development. Iodine deficiency can impair intellectual development. Zinc and other nutrients affect growth, appetite, immune function, and brain processes. When a child seems inattentive, tired, irritable, or struggling to learn, it is not always a nutrient issue, but it is sometimes part of the picture. The developing brain is not forgiving of chronic shortage. Pregnancy adds another layer because nutrient demands rise, while the brain of the fetus is actively developing. Folate, iodine, choline, iron, B12, and omega-3 fatty acids all matter strongly here. Deficiency is not simply about how the pregnant person feels, though that matters a great deal. It is also about whether two nervous systems are being adequately supplied during a highly demanding period of growth. The chemistry of memory, mood, and cognition begins long before anyone remembers anything. There is also something morally clarifying about understanding the mind this way. It reduces shame. People often blame themselves for brain fog, irritability, poor concentration, low motivation, and emotional fragility. They decide they are undisciplined, weak, lazy, dramatic, or simply no longer very good at life. But sometimes the body is under-resourced. Sometimes the brain is trying to produce clear thought from blood that carries less oxygen, nerves that lack support, neurotransmitter pathways missing cofactors, and a nervous system made more irritable by shortage. That does not mean every hard feeling is nutritional, but it means some struggles are less personal than they feel. This matters especially because nutrient deficiencies can often improve with correction, though not always instantly, and not always completely if they have been severe or prolonged. Iron can be replenished, B12 can be restored, folate can rise, magnesium status can improve, vitamin D can be corrected, thyroid-related nutrient problems can be addressed where appropriate. And when that happens, people often describe the change in simple, grateful terms. I feel more like myself. My brain works again. I can focus. I'm not crying at everything. I have patience back. I can remember what I'm doing. These are profound statements disguised as ordinary ones. They reveal just how physical mental life can be. Of course, one must be careful not to turn nutrition into a universal answer for every psychological difficulty. That would be dishonest and unhelpful. Depression, anxiety disorders, trauma, grief, neurodevelopmental differences, chronic stress, loneliness, and many other realities cannot be reduced to nutrient levels. but nutrients are part of the conditions under which the mind functions. If those conditions are poor, mental suffering can be intensified, cognitive performance can fall, and resilience can thin out. Biology is not the whole story. It is still part of the story. The brain is often portrayed as something brilliant, abstract, almost untouchable. But in truth it is vulnerable in very earthly ways. It needs oxygen, it needs fatty membranes, it needs methyl donors and cofactors and minerals and vitamins and stable blood chemistry. It needs enough nourishment to maintain both the hardware and the signalling. If you starve the body of those things, the mind begins to show it. Not always with drama, often with small losses first. Less recall, less patience, less brightness, less steadiness in mood, less confidence in thought. The person remains themselves but under dimmer conditions, and that may be the most important thing to keep in mind as we move forward. Deficiency does not always change who someone is. Often it changes how much of them can get through. It lowers the available energy, sharpness, warmth, and emotional range with which a person meets the world. The self is still there, but the delivery has suffered, which is why the body so often leaves clues not only in the blood or bones or hormones, but right there in the daily texture of thought itself. And once you begin to recognize that, the next signs become easier to understand too, because nutrient shortage does not stay hidden inside the mind alone. Sooner or later it starts to write itself on the outside, in the skin, the hair, the nails, and the visible surfaces where the body keeps its most public records. Most people do not think about their bones very often, which is probably a sign that bones are doing their job. A healthy skeleton tends to be quiet. It holds, it carries, it absorbs impact, it gives shape to the body and leverage to the muscles, and asks for very little praise in return. You do not usually thank your femur while climbing stairs. You do not pause at the sink and offer a kind word to your ribs for keeping everything arranged. Bones are among the least dramatic tissues in daily life, right up until the moment they are not, and that is part of what makes nutrient problems involving bones so easy to miss. The weakening often happens out of sight, without pain at first, without clear warning, and without the sort of symptoms that make a person think immediately of calcium or vitamin D. The structure changes quietly, the losses are gradual, the body goes on functioning, and in that long silence, the foundation can slowly become less secure. There is something almost unfair about how hidden bone loss can be. A person may feel mostly ordinary while their skeleton is becoming more fragile year by year. They may still walk, work, exercise a little, carry bags, bend down, lift children, climb stairs, and live what looks from the outside like a normal physical life. Meanwhile, the bones are remodeling constantly, taking down old tissue, laying down new tissue, responding to hormones, nutrient supply, movement, age, and overall health. Bone is not dead scaffolding. It is living material under permanent maintenance. That means it can become stronger with the right support and weaker with the wrong support. But because the process is slow, the body does not always make a great deal of noise about it until the architecture has already changed substantially. To understand why calcium and vitamin D matter so much here, it helps to step back and ask what a bone actually is. It is easy to imagine bone as a hard, fixed thing, like a shelf bracket or a dry branch. In reality, bone is a composite tissue. It has a protein framework, mostly collagen, and mineral content, largely calcium and phosphorus in the form of hydroxyapatite crystals, that gives it hardness and strength. There are cells that build bone, cells that break it down, blood vessels running through it, marrow inside it, and constant communication between bone, kidneys, intestines, and hormones. The skeleton is more like an active bank and warehouse than a set of dead beams. It stores minerals, responds to demand, and changes itself according to the body's needs. This is where calcium enters. Calcium is the major mineral people most strongly associate with bones, and for good reason. The vast majority of the body's calcium is stored in the skeleton and teeth. Bone is the main reservoir. But calcium is also needed for many other things: muscle contraction, nerve transmission, blood clotting, cell signaling, and the rhythmic behaviour of the heart. The body cannot afford to let blood calcium levels drift very far from normal, because too little or too much can disturb these vital functions. So when dietary calcium intake is inadequate, or when calcium absorption is poor, the body has a solution that is brilliant in the short term and expensive in the long term. It borrows from the bones. This is one of the most important ideas in understanding hidden weakening. The body does not wait until your skeleton feels soft and then ask politely for more calcium. It maintains blood calcium first, always. If the level begins to fall, hormones step in, particularly parathyroid hormone, which helps draw calcium from bone, increase calcium reabsorption in the kidneys, and activate vitamin D so the intestines can absorb more calcium from food. This is clever and life-saving, but it means a person can maintain normal blood calcium while quietly losing calcium from the skeleton. A blood test can look respectable, while the bank account in bone is being used to cover current expenses. Vitamin D is essential in this story, because it helps the body absorb calcium from the intestine. Without enough vitamin D, the body becomes less efficient at taking calcium from food into the bloodstream. That means even an apparently decent intake may not be used as well as it should be. Vitamin D also helps regulate phosphate and supports bone mineralization, muscle function, and several other processes. In children, severe deficiency can lead to rickets, where bones do not mineralize properly and can become soft and bowed. In adults, severe deficiency can contribute to osteomalacia, a condition of softened bones with bone pain and muscle weakness. But those are the more obvious ends of the spectrum. Far more common is the long period before anything dramatic, when low vitamin D and inadequate calcium are slowly making the skeleton less robust. This is why the phrase, bones in the dark, feels appropriate. Much of bone weakening happens in darkness, both literal and figurative. Literal, because vitamin D is closely tied to sunlight exposure, and many modern lives happen indoors. Figurative, because the process is largely hidden from awareness. People do not usually feel their bones mineralizing well. They also do not feel them failing to mineralize well, at least not at first. Bone density can decline for years without pain. The body may become more fracture-prone without giving many useful hints in advance. It is not like a strained muscle that aches at the moment of injury. It is a long structural drift, often discovered only when something breaks more easily than it should. The image many people have of calcium deficiency is often too simple. They imagine that if calcium is low, the bones will somehow obviously hurt or crumble in a visible, dramatic way. Real life is slower and more subtle. Low intake over time, especially when combined with low vitamin D, hormonal changes, inactivity, aging, low protein intake, smoking, certain medications or digestive problems can gradually reduce bone mineral density. The stages are not always noticeable. Osteopenia, lower than normal bone density that is not yet osteoporosis, usually produces no symptoms. Osteoporosis, where the bones become more porous and fragile, also often produces no symptoms until there is a fracture. A person may not feel "my bones are weak." They may simply trip, lift, twist or fall, and then discover that a wrist, hip or vertebra has failed under a force that would once have been tolerable. Vertebral fractures are especially revealing because they can sometimes happen with surprisingly modest trauma or even be overlooked entirely at first. A person develops back pain, loses some height, or gradually stoops more with age. It is easy to blame aging generally, but sometimes these are compression fractures in weakened vertebrae, tiny collapses in the architecture of the spine. The body has been thinning the beams in silence, and only now does the shape begin to change. There is something sobering about that. Height loss is not always just the years passing. Sometimes it is a structural record of mineral loss. Muscle weakness belongs here too, because vitamin D is not only about bones. People with low vitamin D may notice that their muscles feel less reliable, especially proximal muscles like those in the thighs and hips. Rising from a chair, climbing stairs, or regaining balance may become harder. This matters enormously because muscle weakness increases fall risk, and falls are one of the main ways fragile bones turn quiet weakness into visible injury. So vitamin D deficiency can influence both the strength of the bones and the chances of landing badly on them. The body does not separate these risks into neat academic categories, it simply lives with both. Children tell this story differently because their bones are still being built. During growth, calcium and vitamin D are not merely preserving an existing structure, they are helping create it. If these nutrients are insufficient, the consequences can be more dramatic because the skeleton is actively forming. Rickets, the classic result of severe vitamin D deficiency in children, can cause delayed growth, bone pain, bowed legs, skeletal deformities, and delayed tooth eruption. The bones are not mineralizing with enough strength. The house is being built with poor materials or incomplete support. In a way, this is easier to notice because development itself is visible. In adults, by contrast, the story is often one of gradual loss from a structure that looked fine for many years. The body's willingness to sacrifice bone for immediate needs is one of the most practical and slightly unsettling features of physiology. It makes sense. Calcium in the blood is essential for heart rhythm, nerve transmission, and muscle contraction. If the body had to choose between protecting the precise operation of the heart and preserving long-term bone density, the heart wins every time. No committee is formed, no ethical debate is held. The bones are treated as reserve. This is not cruelty, it is survival. But survival logic is not always kind to long-term comfort. What keeps you functioning today may cost you structural security decades later. Hormones complicate this further, especially estrogen. Estrogen helps restrain bone breakdown. When estrogen levels fall, as they do after menopause, bone resorption tends to increase. This is one reason bone density often drops more quickly in the years after menopause. If calcium intake is low, vitamin D is low, protein is inadequate, activity is low, or other risk factors are present, the process can accelerate further. Many women discover their bone vulnerability only after a fracture or a scan. They may have felt generally healthy, perhaps a bit stiff or weaker with age, but nothing that would suggest the skeleton itself had become less trustworthy. The quietness of bone loss is part of what makes it dangerous. Men are not exempt, of course, though they are often discussed less in this context. Bone loss can affect anyone with poor intake, low vitamin D, certain medications such as long-term steroids, chronic illness, hormonal issues, smoking, heavy alcohol use, malabsorption, or inactivity. Because osteoporosis is culturally associated with older women, men may be even less likely to think of their bones as vulnerable. Yet the skeleton is loyal only to physiology, not to stereotypes. Low calcium intake does not act alone. Protein matters too, because bone has a protein matrix. So do phosphorus, magnesium, vitamin K, and other nutrients. Weight-bearing exercise matters. Resistance training matters. Hormonal health matters. Bone responds to use. A skeleton that experiences regular loading receives the message that it is needed and should remain strong. A skeleton that is underloaded, as in prolonged inactivity or immobilization, receives the opposite message. Bone is metabolically expensive tissue. The body prefers not to maintain unnecessary excess. If movement is minimal and nutrient supply poor, the system may gradually thin what it sees as surplus. This is efficient biology and irritating life advice merged into one truth. Bones like to be fed and used. Still, calcium and vitamin D remain central because they are such common limiting factors. Calcium has to arrive. Vitamin D has to help absorb it. Sunlight or dietary sources or supplementation must provide enough vitamin D to keep the system working. Yet modern life often makes this difficult. Many people spend little time outdoors in direct sunlight. In colder climates, sunlight is weak for much of the year. Sunscreen, clothing, indoor work, and urban life all reduce skin production of vitamin D. Dietary sources are limited unless someone regularly eats fortified foods, fatty fish, egg yolks, or supplements appropriately. On the calcium side, some people avoid dairy without planning equivalent sources. Others simply do not prioritize calcium-rich foods. Some eat very little overall. Some have digestive conditions that impair absorption. Some consume enough on paper, but do not absorb or retain it well because of other problems in the system. This is important because deficiency is not always obvious from appearance. A person can look well, be of average weight, even exercise somewhat, and still have suboptimal calcium or vitamin D status. Bone loss does not require a dramatic backstory. It can happen quietly in ordinary lives. A person works indoors, avoids dairy because it upsets their stomach, rarely eats fish, spends winters in heavy clothing, and has never thought much about vitamin D. Another person eats lightly for years, uses caffeine heavily, smokes, and resists weight-bearing exercise. Another takes medications that interfere with absorption. Another has celiac disease not yet diagnosed and absorbs poorly for years. The bones keep adapting to whatever the body can provide. When vitamin D is low enough to cause osteomalacia in adults, the symptoms can finally become more explicit. Bone pain may appear, often in the back, pelvis, hips, ribs, or legs. Muscles may feel weak. Walking may become uncomfortable. Rising from a chair may require more effort. Some people describe a deep ache rather than a sharp pain, as though the frame itself has become tender. This is different from osteoporosis, where bones are fragile but not usually painful until a fracture occurs. Osteomalacia is more about poor mineralization of bone. Osteoporosis is more about reduced bone mass and microarchitectural deterioration. Both can involve vitamin D problems, but they feel different. Biology, as usual, refuses to offer one single tidy pattern. There is a curious emotional dimension to hidden bone weakness too. Bones represent security in a very literal sense. They are our underlying confidence that the body will hold if we move, stumble, lift, or age. When bone health is threatened, people may not feel it day to day, but once they know about it, the knowledge can change their relationship with their own physical life. Stairs become more significant. Ice becomes more insulting. A fall is no longer a bruise waiting to happen, but a real risk. The body begins to feel less forgiving. That psychological shift often arrives long after the biology has changed, which is another reason prevention matters. It is easier to maintain trust in a structure than to rebuild it after a visible failure. Teeth, though often discussed separately, are part of this public record too. Poor mineral status can affect tooth development and maintenance, especially during childhood. Calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D, and general nutrition all matter. The mouth is one of the earliest places where the body's material history becomes visible. Enamel, eruption timing, susceptibility, and overall dental strength reflect a long conversation between diet, development, hygiene, and physiology. Teeth, like bones, are hard tissues that tell quiet truths. One of the trickier aspects of calcium is that people sometimes treat supplementation as a full solution without considering the rest of the picture. A tablet can help if intake is low, but bones do not respond to calcium in isolation. The body still needs vitamin D, adequate protein, activity, hormonal support, and overall health. Likewise, vitamin D is not a magical sunshine hormone that solves all modern fatigue and gloom. It matters greatly, but it works inside a network. Oversimplification is comforting. Biology is not. The skeleton asks for several things at once and usually receives them unevenly. The same is true of food patterns. A person who eats very little overall, even if the diet is not dramatically bad, may have lower intakes of calcium, protein, magnesium, phosphorus, and vitamin D all at once. Someone with a restrictive eating disorder is especially vulnerable because bone building and maintenance are expensive. The body under chronic energy shortage prioritizes survival. Reproductive hormones may decline. bone resorption may increase, peak bone mass may never be fully achieved in younger individuals, or ongoing losses may continue in older ones. This is one of the quieter but more serious long-term consequences of undernourishment. The person may look functional, but the skeleton remembers the shortage. Aging layers onto all this because appetite may decline, skin synthesis of vitamin D becomes less efficient, absorption may change, activity may decrease, and the cumulative effects of decades begin to show. Yet even then, bone weakening is not inevitable in exactly the same way or at exactly the same pace. Support matters, nutrient intake matters, exercise matters, falls prevention matters. The skeleton responds to care, even late in life. It may not be possible to return every beam to youthful thickness, but maintenance and strengthening remain worthwhile. Bone is stubbornly alive that way, and perhaps that is the hopeful part of this story. Hidden weakening is real, but so is the body's capacity to respond when given what it needs. Calcium can be supplied, vitamin D can be corrected, weight-bearing and resistance exercise can stimulate bone maintenance, protein intake can improve, underlying causes of malabsorption can be treated, hormonal and medical contributors can be addressed, falls can be prevented. The skeleton may be quiet, but it's not indifferent. It changes according to the conditions around it. If those conditions improve, the structure often becomes more secure than it would have if left adrift. Still, the main lesson remains. Bones rarely complain early. They weaken in partial silence. They are a long-term tissue living in a short-term body, constantly asked to surrender calcium for present needs while hoping future support will arrive. When it does not, the losses are hidden. The weakening happens in darkness, one remodeling cycle at a time, one season indoors at a time, 1 year of low intake or poor absorption at a time. By the time a fracture makes the story obvious, the plot has been unfolding for much longer than anyone realised. So if the body's a house, then calcium and vitamin D are among the quiet materials and managers that keep the frame trustworthy while no one is watching. They do not perform with much fanfare. They do not usually announce themselves in the daylight of symptoms until the problem is well established. But they are there beneath every step, every reach, every fall avoided and every lift completed without fear. And once you begin to understand how long the body can hide structural loss before admitting it, the next clues start to make more sense as well, because nutrient deficiency does not remain buried forever. Eventually it begins to show on the surface, in the skin, the nails, the hair, and the outward details where the body reveals what it can no longer afford to maintain perfectly. The body has a habit of revealing internal trouble through external details, which is both useful and a little unfair. Useful because skin, hair, nails, lips, gums, and eyes can give early clues about what the body's missing. Unfair because these clues are easy to dismiss as cosmetic, seasonal, stressful, or simply the ordinary tax of modern life. A person notices dry skin and blames the weather, hair shedding and blames shampoo, age, stress, hormones, hard water, soft water, or the moon. Brittle nails are filed, covered, or ignored. Mouth cracks are treated with lip balm. Pale skin is explained away as bad lighting. The body is speaking, but it is speaking in surfaces, and surfaces are easy for people to underestimate. Yet those surfaces matter precisely because they are where the body often reveals what it can no longer maintain perfectly. Hair, skin, nails, and mucosal tissues are constantly renewing. They require protein, minerals, vitamins, healthy circulation, hormones, and enough energy for regular maintenance. When nutrient supply is good, they tend to hold up quietly. When supply is poor, they are often among the first places where the body cuts corners. This is not vanity, it is budgeting. If the body must choose between preserving oxygen delivery and preserving glossy hair, it chooses oxygen. If it must choose between stable nerves and attractive nails, the nails lose the contest every time. The visible tissues are often where the effects of shortage appear first because they are important. but not as immediately important as the organs that keep us alive. That makes the outside of the body a kind of public record. Not a perfect one, because many skin and hair changes have nothing to do with nutrient deficiencies, but a meaningful one. Patterns on the surface often tell you something about what is happening underneath. The body is practical. It sends resources first to what it considers essential. The skin still gets support, the hair still grows, the nails still form, but not always with the same generosity. The result is a long list of small external clues that are individually easy to overlook and collectively much harder to ignore. Skin is perhaps the clearest example, because it is both a protective organ and a metabolically active tissue. It renews itself constantly. It helps guard against infection, regulate temperature, and prevent excessive fluid loss. For all that to happen well, it needs protein, essential fats, zinc, vitamin A, vitamin C, B vitamins, iron, and more. If those nutrients are low, the skin may become dry, rough, flaky, inflamed, slower to heal, more prone to cracking, or more vulnerable to irritation. This is why bad skin is not always just a cosmetic complaint. Sometimes it is a clue that tissue maintenance is being underfunded. Vitamin A is one of the classic nutrients tied to skin and epithelial health. It helps maintain the normal structure and function of skin and mucous membranes. When vitamin A is low, the skin can become dry and rough, sometimes with a characteristic bumpy texture, often described as follicular hyperkeratosis, where small raised plugs form around hair follicles. This is not the only possible cause of rough skin, of course, but it is one of the more traditional examples of deficiency leaving a mark where it can be seen. The eyes may also become dry, and dark adaptation can worsen, which makes vitamin A deficiency one of those conditions where the outer and inner clues appear together if someone knows how to notice them. Zinc deficiency also often leaves its signature on the skin. Zinc is essential for wound healing, immune function, cell division, and tissue repair. If zinc is low, the skin may heal poorly, become more irritated, or develop rashes, sometimes especially around body openings in more severe deficiency states. Cuts and scrapes may linger. Minor injuries may seem to stay red too long. The person may not think of this as a nutritional problem. They more often think their skin is sensitive, their immune system is low, or they are just unlucky with healing. But the skin's sluggish repair is often the body's way of admitting that it is short on one of the tools needed to rebuild tissue efficiently. Vitamin C gives another revealing example. Because vitamin C is necessary for collagen synthesis, deficiency affects connective tissue strength and repair. In scurvy, the classic severe deficiency state, the skin may bruise easily, tiny hemorrhages can appear around hair follicles, wounds heal poorly, gums bleed, and the whole tissue structure becomes less stable. Severe scurvy is not common in many settings, but lower vitamin C intake can still contribute to poor healing and fragile tissues long before anyone reaches textbook extremes. If the body lacks enough vitamin C, the collagen that helps hold tissues together is not formed as well. The outside begins to show the weakness, because the outside depends on connective tissue integrity as much as the inside does. Iron deficiency often shows itself in outward ways too, though not always dramatically. Pallor is one of the best-known signs. Skin may look less rosy, and in the eyelids or nail beds may appear pale, but pallor is not always easy to judge in oneself, especially because people adapt to gradual changes and lighting is a notorious liar. More telling sometimes are the nails and the hair. Iron deficiency can contribute to brittle nails, ridging, and in some cases spoon-shaped nails, a condition called koilonychia, where the nails become thin and curve upward at the edges. Hair shedding can also increase. Again, hair loss has many possible causes, but iron deficiency belongs high on the list of nutritional contributors because rapidly growing tissues like hair follicles suffer when the body is short on oxygen carrying capacity and iron-dependent processes. Hair is particularly interesting because it is biologically expendable. in a way people do not emotionally experience it. The body does not see luxurious hair as a survival priority. It sees it as something nice to maintain if resources allow. When resources do not allow, hair often becomes thinner, drier, more fragile, or more prone to shedding. This can happen with iron deficiency, zinc deficiency, protein energy malnutrition, essential fatty acid deficiency, thyroid-related nutrient problems, and other systemic strains. From the person's point of view, hair changes can feel dramatic and personal. From the body's point of view, they're efficient rationing. The follicles move into a less generous growth pattern because the body would prefer to preserve more urgent tissues first. Zinc is especially tied to hair as well. Low zinc can contribute to hair thinning or hair loss because of its roles in cell division and tissue repair. Selenium and copper can also matter. Severe protein deficiency can lead to hair that is sparse, brittle, or altered in colour and texture. In children with protein energy malnutrition, hair can become thin, easily plucked, or lose pigment. The body's making a very plain statement there. It does not have enough building material to maintain non-essential outward features at full quality. Protein deserves more attention in this discussion, because while much of tonight's larger story is centered on vitamins and minerals, skin and hair are built from protein-rich structures. Collagen, keratin, enzymes, repair molecules, transport proteins, immune factors all depend on amino acids. A person who eats too little overall or too little protein in particular may show it on the surface. Hair becomes weaker, skin heals more poorly, nails grow less well, muscle mass drops. The face may appear more tired or gaunt. This is one of the simplest truths in nutrition, and one of the easiest to obscure with modern food abundance. A body can consume plenty of calories and still fall short on the materials needed to renew tissues well. The nails may be among the body's most understated messengers. They grow slowly, quietly, and record long stretches of physiology in their shape and texture. Brittle nails may reflect iron deficiency, low protein, frequent wetting and drying, aging, or many other factors. White lines, ridges, spooning, thinning, splitting, or slow growth can all suggest that something is affecting the body's ability to maintain keratin-based structures. None of these signs is specific enough to diagnose on sight, but they become more meaningful when they appear alongside fatigue, hair shedding, pallor, poor healing, or dietary risk factors. A nail is not merely decoration. It is a small, hard surface being built out of the body's available resources. If those resources are inconsistent, the nails often record the inconsistency. The mouth is one of the richest places to look for clues because it contains tissues that renew quickly and are sensitive to nutrient shortages. Cracks at the corners of the mouth, known as angular cheilitis, can be associated with deficiencies in iron, riboflavin, B6, B12, folate, and sometimes zinc. A sore, smooth, swollen, or unusually red tongue, called glossitis, can also occur in iron deficiency and several B vitamin deficiencies, especially B12, folate, riboflavin, and niacin. Mouth ulcers, gum bleeding, and mucosal irritation may all reflect nutritional strain, among other causes. People often experience these symptoms as isolated annoyances. They buy ointment, change toothpaste, blame stress, or wait them out. Meanwhile, the body may be using the fastest renewing tissues to announce that red blood cell production, collagen synthesis, or epithelial maintenance is undersupplied. Gums deserve their own moment because they are wonderfully revealing when vitamin C is low. Healthy gums rely on strong connective tissue and good repair. In scurvy, gums can become swollen, tender, and prone to bleeding. Again, that is the more dramatic end of deficiency. But even milder tissue fragility can make the mouth seem slower to recover from brushing, dental work, or minor irritation. The body surfaces are often the first places where collagen weakness becomes noticeable, because those tissues are constantly in use and constantly renewing. The eyes can also reveal deficiency though often more subtly than people expect. Vitamin A deficiency can cause dryness and poor dark adaptation, making it harder to see in low light. The eyes may feel irritated, dry, or less comfortable. In more severe deficiency, classic ocular signs can develop. B vitamin deficiencies and iron deficiency may also contribute to pallor or general tiredness in facial appearance. The body often tells the truth around the eyes because the tissues there are thin, visible, and highly active. A face that looks more drawn, pale, or dull may reflect many things, including poor sleep and stress, but nutrition belongs on that list as well. Then there is the question of colour, which is one of the most primitive ways the body displays its internal state. Pallor can suggest anemia or low blood volume. Yellowing can suggest liver or blood-related issues. Loss of healthy pinkness in lips or gums can point toward reduced hemoglobin. Hair losing luster or pigmentation can reflect structural insufficiency. The body's colours are not merely aesthetic, they are information. We simply live in a culture that tends to treat appearance as either beauty or vanity, and forget that it is also biology. Skin texture can be surprisingly informative too. Roughness, flaking, and excessive dryness can reflect low vitamin A, essential fatty acid deficiency, dehydration, low thyroid function, or poor general nutrition. Certain rashes may be associated with niacin deficiency, zinc deficiency, or other shortages. Pellagra, caused by niacin deficiency, classically produces a photosensitive dermatitis, meaning the skin reacts especially on sun-exposed areas. This is one of those conditions where the skin becomes a literal map of underlying metabolic trouble. The person may look sunburned or inflamed in characteristic regions, while the digestive system and brain may also be struggling. Again, a deficiency rarely confines itself to one symptom. It tends to reveal itself across the systems the missing nutrient supports. Biotin is often mentioned in conversations about hair and nails, usually with far more marketing than nuance. True biotin deficiency is uncommon, but when it occurs it can cause hair thinning, skin rash, and neurological symptoms. It is a reminder that not every supplement popular for appearance is solving a common deficiency, but also that the principle remains valid. When nutrients involved in tissue maintenance are truly low, visible tissues often respond first. The mistake is not in noticing that hair and skin reflect nutrition. The mistake is in assuming one fashionable nutrient explains every cosmetic complaint. Essential fatty acids also deserve a place here because the skin barrier depends in part on healthy fats. Deficiency is uncommon in many settings but can produce dry, scaly skin and poor growth or wound healing. Even without true deficiency, diets very low in overall quality fats can leave the skin feeling less resilient. The body's outer barrier is built from more than one material, and fats help make it supple and functional. Skin that cannot hold moisture well, repair well, or defend well is often a skin barrier whose underlying construction is under strain. One of the reasons external clues matter so much is that they are visible before serious internal damage becomes undeniable. Hair shedding may precede frank anemia. Cracks at the mouth may appear before someone realizes several B vitamins are low. Poor wound healing may precede more obvious signs of zinc deficiency. Brittle nails may be noticed before iron deficiency is fully diagnosed. In that sense, the outside of the body is not superficial at all. It is early warning tissue. The trouble is that early warning tissue speaks in annoying everyday inconveniences rather than in dramatic speeches. Dry lips do not sound urgent. Slow healing does not sound profound. A bit more hair in the shower drain does not sound like a metabolic story, and yet sometimes it is exactly that. There is also an emotional dimension to these visible changes. When nutrient deficiency begins to show on the outside, people often feel embarrassed, unattractive, or frustrated long before they feel medically concerned. Hair loss, skin changes, brittle nails, and mouth problems affect how someone sees themselves and how they believe others see them. That distress is real and should not be dismissed as vanity. The surface of the body is where identity is often experienced. But there is also relief in understanding that visible deterioration is not always random bad luck or personal failure. Sometimes the body is revealing a material shortage. It is not betraying beauty. It is reprioritizing survival. The same principle applies to wound healing. A person who notices that every scratch lingers, every cut seems to take forever, and every small injury leaves a more dramatic trace may feel as though their body has become fragile. In a sense it has, but often for understandable reasons. Zinc may be low, vitamin C may be low, protein may be inadequate, diabetes or poor circulation may also play a role. The point is that healing is expensive. It requires collagen, immune activity, cell division, blood supply, and energy. If one or more of those ingredients is limited, repair slows. The outside of the body becomes a live demonstration of internal scarcity. This is also why skin and hair changes often appear in people who are under chronic stress, overtrained, undereating, or chronically ill. Even if the diet is not dramatically deficient in one classic nutrient, the body may be operating in a state of overall shortage or high demand. Calories may be too low, protein may be too low, iron stores may be dropping, zinc may be marginal, thyroid function may be altered, digestion may be poor. In that state, the outer tissues become less polished because the body is spending its budget elsewhere. It is not a sign that the person has failed at skincare. It is a sign that biology has begun to negotiate with scarcity. The body's visible surfaces also remind us that deficiency is often cumulative. Few people wake up one day with severe nutritional changes written across the skin. More often, the signs gather slowly. First, the lips crack more often. Then the skin feels drier than usual. Then the nails split. Then the hairbrush seems fuller. Then healing takes longer. Then fatigue becomes harder to explain. Then perhaps the blood work finally catches up with what the outside had been hinting at for months. The body usually whispers in layers before it ever shouts. Of course, not every change in skin, hair, or nails is nutritional. Dermatology is vast, endocrinology is complicated, genetics matter, age matters, stress matters, sunlight matters, autoimmune disease matters. A rash is not automatically zinc deficiency. Hair loss is not automatically iron deficiency. Pale skin is not always anemia. That kind of reduction would be too simple to be useful, but nutrition belongs firmly in the picture, especially when several small clues cluster together, or when diet, absorption, or chronic illness create risk. The outside of the body is not a perfect diagnostic manual. It is a set of hints, and perhaps that is the real importance of these visible signs. They make deficiency harder to deny. A feeling can be argued with. Fatigue can be minimized. Brain fog can be blamed on stress. But when the body begins writing the story on its surface, the clues become harder to dismiss. Hair has thinned, nails are brittle. The corners of the mouth keep splitting. Cuts linger. Skin has lost resilience. Pallor sits in the face. Something is being under-maintained. So the next time you think of skin, hair, or nails, it may help to see them less as decorative extras and more as publicly visible tissues competing for resources in the same economy as the heart, brain, blood, and bones. They are among the first places where the body shows what it can no longer afford to maintain at full quality. And once you start to understand those outward signs as nutritional clues rather than random inconveniences, another part of the story comes into focus too, because deficiency does not only alter visible surfaces, it can also change appetite itself, shaping cravings and hunger in ways that are less straightforward than people often imagine. One of the stranger things about the body is that it does not always ask clearly for what it needs. If it did, life might be much simpler. A low iron store would produce a calm and helpful inner voice saying, "Good evening." More absorbable iron would be appreciated, along with a plan for the underlying blood loss. low magnesium would arrive as a polite request for legumes, nuts, seeds, or other useful sources. Zinc shortage might speak up and say, some additional nutrient density would be lovely. Also, perhaps let us stop pretending crackers count as a full strategy. Instead, the body speaks in sensations that are often messy, emotional, and easy to mistranslate. Hunger, craving, appetite, fullness, aversion, restlessness, the desire to snack for no obvious reason, the strange urge to chew ice, the flatness of food when nothing seems appealing. These are not always what they seem. That is what makes the relationship between nutrient deficiency and appetite so fascinating. People often imagine hunger as a straightforward signal. You need fuel, so you feel hungry. You eat, and the signal turns off. Sometimes that is exactly how it works. But real human appetite is not a simple fuel gauge. It is shaped by hormones, blood sugar, stress, habit, reward, memory, sleep, smell, mood, social context, availability, and nutrient status. A body may need energy and produce hunger. A body may need a specific nutrient and produce something vaguer, stranger, or more misleading. A brain may want comfort and call it hunger. A tired person may want stimulation and find themselves standing in the kitchen, opening cupboards with the mild confusion of someone who forgot both the question and the answer. Appetite is one of the body's most important languages, but it is not always a precise one. It helps to begin with the distinction between energy hunger and nutrient hunger, even though in real life they overlap. Energy hunger is the broad demand for calories. The body needs fuel to keep everything running. If intake has been low, blood sugar has fallen, glycogen stores are being used, or energy needs are high, hunger may increase. Nutrient hunger is more complicated. The body may be receiving enough or even too many calories while still falling short on iron, zinc, protein, magnesium, essential fats, or certain vitamins. In that situation, a person can feel unsatisfied in a way that seems like hunger, but is not resolved well by the foods they keep choosing. They eat, but the body still does not feel fully answered. There is enough fuel, perhaps, but not enough material. This is one of the odd tensions of modern eating. It is entirely possible to consume plenty of food and yet remain undernourished in important ways. If much of the diet is built from highly processed foods that provide energy without much micronutrient density, the body may be well supplied with calories and poorly supplied with the minerals and vitamins needed to use those calories well. The person may feel hungry often, snack often, and still feel oddly depleted. That can create a very confusing experience. They may conclude they lack self-control or are always hungry by nature, when part of the issue is that the body keeps receiving energy without the broader nutritional support that helps regulate appetite, blood sugar, tissue repair, and satiety cleanly. Protein is one of the most important nutrients in this story, because appetite often becomes difficult to regulate when protein intake is too low. Protein helps with satiety more than many ultra-processed foods do, and it provides amino acids needed for muscle maintenance, enzymes, hormones, neurotransmitters, and tissue repair. If meals are low in protein and built mostly around refined carbohydrates and fats, a person may eat a substantial amount and still find themselves looking for something not long afterward. The body is not necessarily asking for more total food. It may be asking for a more complete meal. This is a common pattern in people who graze all day on easy foods and then wonder why they feel underfed despite never seeming to stop eating. The body can be full of snacks and still short on substance. Iron deficiency produces one of the clearest examples of a craving that is not normal hunger at all. Pica, the craving for non-food substances, is one of the stranger and more memorable symptoms in nutritional medicine. People may crave ice, clay, dirt, starch, paper, or other non-nutritive substances. Ice chewing is especially associated with iron deficiency. No one fully understands why, but the association is strong enough to be clinically useful. Here the body is not asking for calories. It is not even asking in any direct sense for iron-rich food. It is producing a peculiar behavioural clue that something in the system is wrong. This is an excellent reminder that deficiency does not always create elegant, biologically sensible seeming desires. Sometimes the body speaks in detours. Appetite loss can also be a sign of deficiency, which makes the whole topic even less tidy. People often imagine deficiency leading to ravenous hunger because the body is lacking something, but low nutrient status can also flatten appetite altogether. Zinc deficiency is especially relevant here because zinc plays a role in taste and smell. If zinc is low, food may taste duller and smell less vivid. Eating becomes less rewarding. Appetite may shrink. The person may start eating less simply because nothing seems particularly worth eating. Over time, this worsens the problem. Lower intake leads to lower zinc intake and possibly lower intake of other nutrients as well. The body becomes trapped in a quiet loop where deficiency makes nourishment less appealing. B vitamin deficiencies can also contribute to poor appetite, especially when they affect the mouth and digestive system. A sore tongue, cracks at the corners of the mouth, nausea, low energy, and digestive discomfort can all make eating less attractive. If food becomes physically uncomfortable or emotionally unrewarding, intake slips. Deficiency then deepens. Again, the body's signals are not always helpful in the short term. A nutrient shortage can create the very lack of appetite that makes correction harder. Iodine-related thyroid slowing can alter appetite in another way. When thyroid hormone levels fall, the whole body's tempo changes. Some people experience reduced appetite, others a more complicated mismatch in which they do not feel especially hungry but still gain weight because energy expenditure is lower. This is one reason appetite is such a misleading guide on its own. It reflects not only need, but also metabolic rate, sensory reward, digestive function, mood, and hormonal state. A person with sluggish thyroid function may eat modestly and still feel heavy and slow. Another with poor sleep and blood sugar swings may feel constantly hungry, despite having eaten enough. Appetite is real, but it is not always honest. Cravings are even more deceptive. People love the idea that cravings are the body's precise nutritional wisdom. Craving chocolate means magnesium. Craving salt means sodium. Craving red meat means iron. There is something satisfying about this theory because it makes the body sound like an elegant animal with flawless internal communication. The truth is less refined. Cravings are shaped heavily by learned reward, stress, emotional state, memory, convenience, blood sugar shifts, and the kinds of foods the brain has come to associate with quick comfort. If you crave chocolate when tired, it may be because chocolate offers sugar, fat, pleasure, familiarity, caffeine-like stimulation, and immediate reward, not because your cells have produced a well-phrased mineral request. That does not mean cravings are meaningless. It means they are indirect. A person low in magnesium, exhausted, underslept and stressed may indeed crave chocolate more often, but that may happen because the body is in a state that makes energy-dense, highly rewarding foods more appealing, not because there is a direct magnesium detection signal whispering cocoa. A person who craves salty foods may be dealing with habit, dehydration, electrolyte issues, hormonal influences, or simple preference. Sometimes nutrient status overlaps with craving, but the overlap is messy, and it is usually safer to treat cravings as clues to a general state rather than precise diagnostic messages. Blood sugar regulation plays a powerful role here too. Meals low in protein and fibre and high in refined carbohydrates can cause rapid rises and falls in blood glucose. When glucose falls quickly afterward, the body may respond with renewed hunger, shakiness, irritability, or urgent desire for quick energy. The person often interprets this as an insatiable appetite or being someone who needs sugar. Sometimes what they really need is steadier meal composition. If nutrient-poor foods are creating repeated swings, the body can feel hungry in a way that has more to do with unstable fuel delivery than with true nutrient sufficiency. The body is asking for stability, and the brain is translating that into cookies. Sleep deprivation makes this all worse. when people are short on sleep, hormones that influence hunger and fullness shift in ways that tend to increase appetite and preference for calorie-dense foods. Reward pathways also become more responsive to food cues. Tired brains want easy energy and comfort. This matters in a discussion of deficiency because nutrient-poor eating patterns often coexist with poor sleep. The person is tired, cravings intensify, choices get easier and less nourishing, and the body receives even less of what it actually needs. What looks from the outside like simple overeating may from the inside feel like a frantic attempt to correct fatigue and under-recovery with the wrong kind of help. Stress creates similar distortions. Some stressed people lose appetite, others become sharply drawn toward highly palatable foods. Cortisol, habit, reward-seeking and emotional soothing all mix together. And because many nutrient deficiencies themselves worsen fatigue, low mood or irritability, the body becomes harder to regulate from both directions at once. A stressed, low-iron, underslept person is not just craving because they are weak-willed. They are moving through life with a brain and body that are under strain in several overlapping ways, each pushing appetite toward quick reward and away from balanced nourishment. There is also the matter of satiety, the feeling of being truly fed rather than merely full. Fullness is mechanical. The stomach has volume. Satiety is more integrated. It involves how satisfying the meal was in terms of protein, fiber, fat, nutrient density, sensory experience, and hormonal response. A person can become physically full on low-quality food and still feel unsatisfied afterward. This is one of the reasons I'm hungry again already is not always about excessive appetite. It can be about insufficient satiety from the kind of food chosen. The body may be saying, in effect, yes, that was a quantity of food. I am still waiting for nourishment. Micronutrient deficiencies can hide inside this pattern because the person often responds to unsatisfied appetite by repeating the same kind of eating that caused the problem. More snack foods, more convenience foods, more sweet or salty processed foods. These are easy to eat, easy to crave, and often poor at delivering the minerals and vitamins the body lacks. So the cycle continues. The body keeps asking for something it cannot name clearly. The brain keeps offering the fastest available pleasure. Satisfaction never fully arrives. This is hunger that is not exactly hunger and craving that is not exactly need. But the distinction matters because the solution is not always eat less. Sometimes it is feed the body something more complete. Magnesium, zinc, iron, protein, essential fats, and B vitamins all influence how resilient the body feels, and that influences appetite indirectly. A body that feels depleted is more likely to seek quick comfort. A brain low in energy, oxygen, or emotional steadiness is less patient with long-term nutritional strategies. This is why nutritional struggle often feels moral and personal when it is partly biological. A person says, "I keep wanting junk," when part of the truth is that their body has been running below its needs for so long that reward-seeking has become an understandable survival behavior. The brain under strain does not usually crave lentils. It craves relief. There is an especially interesting relationship between deficiency and sweetness. People who are tired, iron deficient, low in protein, or generally undernourished may find themselves strongly drawn to sugar. Again, this is not because sugar contains the missing nutrients. It is because sugar offers rapid energy and immediate reward. The body is asking for restoration, and sugar is the quickest available impersonation of restoration. But because it does not correct the underlying shortage, the relief is brief. Energy rises, then falls, hunger returns. The body remains undernourished at the micronutrient level. The person feels trapped between constant desire and poor satisfaction. Salt works similarly in a different direction. Salty, crunchy foods are intensely rewarding. For some people, craving salt may reflect dehydration, heavy sweating, or medical causes affecting electrolyte balance. For many others, it simply reflects learned reward and preference. Still, if overall diet quality is poor, Salt cravings can become part of the same cycle, a body under strain reaching repeatedly for the foods that feel most vivid and immediate. The body is not necessarily asking for sodium, it may be asking for care and getting crisps. The flattening of appetite in deficiency is just as important as the amplification of craving. Older adults, people with chronic illness, those with zinc deficiency, depression, digestive problems, B vitamin deficiencies or inflammatory states may simply stop feeling interested in food. Hunger becomes faint. Cooking feels pointless. Meals shrink. Weight may drop, or sometimes not, depending on what remains in the diet. Nutrient intake worsens. The person may say, "I'm just not hungry anymore," as though hunger were a personality trait they misplaced. But appetite loss is often one of the body's most significant warning signs. A system that is undernourished, ill, depressed, or hormonally altered may stop asking loudly for food, even when it needs nourishment badly. This is especially risky because other people often treat visible undereating as more serious than invisible poor quality eating. If someone is thin and appetiteless, concern rises quickly. If someone is eating often but mostly consuming nutrient-poor foods, concern tends to fall because at least they are eating. The body unfortunately can be in trouble in both situations. One person is not receiving enough food. Another is receiving enough food but not enough nourishment. Appetite alone does not tell you which problem is present. Children and pregnancy offer especially clear examples of what the body is really asking for when appetite changes. Growing children need iron, zinc, iodine, protein, essential fats, calcium, and many vitamins to support both body and brain development. Pregnancy dramatically raises needs for folate, iron, iodine, choline, and more. Appetite may increase, decrease, or become more erratic during these periods, but the body's underlying demand for nutrients is real and high. Cravings during pregnancy are famous, of course, but they are not always nutritionally precise. The body may crave odd foods or avoid useful ones. Nausea may interfere, smell becomes more intense, appetite becomes less rational. Yet beneath all that sensory drama, the biological need for dense nourishment is greater than ever. There is also the role of the gut itself. Poor digestive health can distort appetite in several ways. Low stomach acid, reflux, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, malabsorption, nausea, or pain after eating can all make food less desirable or shift someone toward easier, softer, lower quality choices. If nutrient deficiency develops as a result, appetite may distort further. The person begins eating less of what they need because their digestive system has made eating more complicated. Again, the body's requests are being filtered through discomfort, not expressed cleanly. One of the more compassionate ways to understand all of this is to stop imagining appetite as a moral test. It is a signaling system. Sometimes it works beautifully. Sometimes it is confused by reward, stress, sleep, hormonal changes, blood sugar swings, sensory loss, emotional pain, or nutrient shortage. A person who is craving constantly is not necessarily greedy. A person with no appetite is not necessarily disciplined. A person who feels hungry all the time may be underfed in one sense and overfed in another. A person who cannot face dinner may be missing nutrients, not merely motivation. The body is trying to communicate, but the language is layered and imperfect. And still, there are patterns worth trusting. Meals with enough protein, fibre, fat, and micronutrient density tend to satisfy better than meals built mostly from refined convenience foods. A body given adequate iron, zinc, magnesium, B vitamins, iodine, and enough total nourishment tends to regulate appetite with less chaos than one running on shortages and quick fixes. Taste tends to brighten when zinc improves. Energy tends to steady when anemia is corrected. Cravings often soften when sleep improves and meals become more complete. The body may not ask elegantly, but it does respond gratefully when it is finally understood. So perhaps the key lesson is this: cravings and appetite are real, but they are not always literal. Hunger is sometimes about calories, sometimes about blood sugar, sometimes about stress, sometimes about sleep, and sometimes about a body that has been missing something important for too long. The sensation arrives in the mind as I want food, but beneath that feeling may be a more specific reality: more protein, more mineral-rich meals, more regular nourishment, better absorption, steadier blood, less depletion. The body's not always asking for the thing it names. It is asking for relief, stability, and materials, and the translation gets messy on the way up. And once you understand that, the broader modern problem becomes easier to see too, because many of these mixed signals are not accidents. They are shaped by the way people live and eat now, in a world full of abundant food that does not always nourish well, where convenience often outruns density, and the body's ancient needs are forced to negotiate with a very modern menu. It is one of the oddest features of modern life that people can be surrounded by food and still fall short on nourishment. Supermarkets are full, deliveries arrive in minutes, coffee can be topped with cream, syrup, foam, drizzle, and what appears to be a small engineering project. Entire aisles are devoted to snacks. There are bars for energy, bars for sleep, bars for protein, bars for people who would apparently like dessert to introduce itself as wellness. And yet, for all this abundance, nutrient deficiencies have not disappeared. In some cases, they have changed shape, become milder, become less theatrical, or hidden themselves inside ordinary routines. But they are still here, not because food is scarce in the old historical sense, but because quantity and nourishment are not the same thing. This is one of the defining tensions of the modern diet. Human biology still carries ancient needs. Cells still need iron, iodine, zinc, magnesium, folate, B12, calcium, vitamin D, protein, essential fats, vitamin C, and the long cast of nutrients that make ordinary life possible. The body has not moved on from these requirements simply because food now arrives in bright packaging, or can be ordered with a thumb. It still expects the same raw materials it expected before supermarkets, before industrial processing, before midnight snacks could be obtained without putting on shoes. The body is modern only in the sense that it is living now. Its needs are old. And when modern eating patterns fail to meet those old needs, deficiency appears in familiar ways under unfamiliar circumstances. The simplest reason deficiencies still happen is that many modern diets are rich in calories and poor in nutrient density. Nutrient density means how much useful nutrition a food provides relative to its energy content. A food can be high in calories and low in vitamins, minerals, fibre and protein. It can fill the stomach, stimulate reward, and still leave the body waiting for something more complete. Ultra-processed foods are especially important here. They are designed to be convenient, tasty, shelf-stable, easy to overeat, and highly rewarding. Many are not evil, and one should be cautious with melodrama around food. But they do create a pattern in which a person can consume plenty of energy while steadily under-consuming the nutrients needed for blood, bone, nerve, hormonal and tissue health. This matters because the body does not judge meals by marketing language. A breakfast biscuit called Protein Sunrise Crunch does not impress the liver simply because someone in a meeting thought it sounded hopeful. A brightly coloured cereal fortified with several vitamins may still fall short as the foundation of a life if the broader diet remains narrow and heavily refined. Fortification helps in important ways, and public health has benefited enormously from it. But fortification does not fully recreate the complexity of whole foods, nor does it fix every modern pattern of eating. It can patch some holes. It does not automatically produce good nourishment across the board. Another reason deficiencies persist is that convenience often beats planning. Modern life is busy in ways that interact very badly with nutrition. People work long hours, commute, stare at screens late into the evening, live alone, care for children or parents, feel chronically rushed, and enter the final hour of the day with just enough energy to stand in front of a refrigerator and think with mild despair that perhaps cheese is technically a dinner. It is not that people do not know vegetables exist, it is that exhaustion changes what becomes possible. Cooking, shopping, meal planning, chewing slowly, and assembling a balanced plate all require bandwidth. Nutritional decline often begins not with ignorance, but with fatigue. When bandwidth is low, people tend to eat what is easiest. Easy foods are not always bad foods, but the modern easy category is often dominated by items that are refined, low in fibre, low in protein, low in mineral content, and poor at creating lasting satiety. Toast becomes a meal, coffee becomes breakfast, snacks replace lunch, something beige and wrapped becomes dinner. The body keeps going, because it always tries to, but it does so by adapting to a narrower and narrower supply. Over time, this can lead not only to low micronutrient intake, but also to poor protein intake, unstable energy, and an appetite that becomes harder to interpret. There is also the issue of food variety, which the body values more than many people realise. Ancient diets differed enormously across regions, but they often included repeated exposure to a range of minimally processed foods. Grains, legumes, roots, fruits, vegetables, eggs, dairy, fish, meat, nuts, seeds, or whatever local ecology allowed. Modern diets can be surprisingly repetitive even when they look abundant. A person may eat dozens of branded products in a month, but derive most of their nourishment from the same limited ingredients. Refined flour, refined oils, sugar, salt, a little dairy, a little processed meat, and not much else. Variety in packaging is not the same as variety in nutrients. The body does not care how many different logos you consumed if the underlying supply remains narrow. Then there is the problem of dietary restriction, which in modern life comes from many directions. Some restrictions are necessary and wise. Allergies, intolerances, medical conditions, ethical commitments, and cultural practices all shape eating in ways that can be healthy when handled thoughtfully. But restrictive patterns can also become fashionable, anxious, chaotic, or poorly planned. Entire food groups may be cut out in pursuit of weight loss, clean eating, gut health, anti-inflammatory ideals, fear of processed food, fear of animal food, fear of carbohydrates, fear of fat, fear of gluten without medical reason, fear of seed oils, fear of beans, fear of fruit, or the general modern belief that somewhere there must exist a perfect way to eat if only one reads enough alarming things on the internet. The body, unfortunately, is not comforted by dietary ideology. It notices what arrives and what does not. A person can do well on a plant-based diet, but B12 must be addressed and iron, zinc, iodine, calcium, omega-3s and protein deserve care. A person can do well without dairy, but calcium and iodine may need deliberate attention. A person can reduce carbohydrate intake, but fibre, certain vitamins, minerals and overall balance still matter. The problem is not restriction itself. The problem is restriction without replacement. Modern food culture is very good at telling people what to remove, and much less reliable at teaching them what to put back. Weight loss culture adds another layer. Many people live for years in cycles of under-eating, overcompensating, dieting, snacking, and trying again. Chronic low intake, especially if it is protein poor and nutrient poor, can produce exactly the kind of quiet deficiencies we've been discussing. Iron stores drop, hair sheds, bones lose support, mood worsens, concentration fades, menstrual cycles may change. Thyroid function may become less robust under chronic energy restriction. The person often experiences these not as signs of undernourishment, but as signs that they need more discipline. This is one of the sadder features of modern nutritional life. People can interpret the symptoms of deficiency as evidence they should restrict even harder. The ancient need here is not mysterious. The body needs enough energy, enough protein, enough micronutrients, enough regularity. It does not need perfect eating, but it does need sufficient eating. Modern diet culture often makes enough feel morally suspicious. Hunger becomes something to outsmart. Fullness becomes something to distrust. Simplicity becomes something to optimize into absurdity. Meanwhile, the body keeps asking, in very plain biochemical terms, for materials. Another reason deficiencies still occur is that modern food processing often separates pleasure from nourishment. Processing itself is not inherently bad. Cooking is processing. Fermentation is processing. Canning, freezing, milling, fortifying, and preserving can all be useful. The issue is not that foods are processed, but that many ultra-processed foods are engineered primarily for palatability, shelf life, and convenience rather than nutritional completeness. Fibre is removed, textures are softened, chewing is minimized, flavors are intensified, and satiety signals are easily outrun. The result is a diet in which it becomes surprisingly easy to eat often and be undernourished anyway. Ancient bodies encounter modern food environments and respond exactly as one might expect. They pursue salt, sugar, fat, and convenience, because those signals once pointed toward valuable energy. The environment has changed faster than the appetite. Sunlight is another modern casualty, and with it, vitamin D. Human beings evolved in a world where time outdoors was less optional than it is now. Life involved movement, weather, daylight, and much less screen-based indoor existence. Today, many people wake indoors, work indoors, travel indoors, exercise indoors if they exercise at all, and then recover from this by watching light emerge from smaller indoor rectangles. Skin produces less vitamin D under these conditions, especially in winter, at higher latitudes, with darker skin in low sun environments, or with diligent sun protection. The old requirement remains. The modern setting makes it easier to miss. Iodine offers another revealing example. Historically, iodine deficiency was strongly shaped by geography, because soil iodine varies and food grown in iodine-poor regions reflects that. Public health measures like iodized salt helped enormously. Yet modern habits can reintroduce risk in subtle ways. People may reduce salt for health reasons, but not realise that the salt they do use is non-iodized specialty salt. They may avoid dairy, seafood, and eggs. They may assume all salt is nutritionally equivalent. Or they may eat highly processed food with plenty of sodium, but little awareness of whether their broader iodine intake is adequate. A nutrient problem that once belonged to certain landscapes can now reappear through lifestyle and food culture. Iron deficiency still happens for similarly modern old reasons. Menstruation remains biologically ancient. Pregnancy remains biologically ancient. Growth remains biologically ancient. Endurance exercise remains a substantial demand. But these ancient realities now interact with modern eating patterns that may be lighter, more restrictive, more plant-based without careful planning, or simply too chaotic to consistently replace losses. A person may drink coffee with meals, eat little red meat or legumes, have heavy periods, sleep poorly, and remain mildly depleted for years. Nothing about this is exotic. It is ordinary life meeting ordinary biology with less nutritional support than required. Absorption is another part of the answer, and modern medicine has its own role here. Many people live with digestive disorders, autoimmune diseases, bowel inflammation, celiac disease, low stomach acid, pancreatic issues, surgeries, or medication effects that impair nutrient absorption. Some common medications reduce absorption or alter nutrient balance over time. Proton pump inhibitors can affect B12, iron, magnesium, and calcium handling in certain contexts. Metformin is associated with B12 issues in some people. Chronic alcohol use interferes with multiple nutrients. Even when food intake looks acceptable, the body may not be receiving what it needs. This is one reason deficiencies persist in affluent societies. The problem is not always access to food. Sometimes it is access from food into the body. Aging intensifies many of these challenges. Older adults may eat less, absorb less, cook less, shop less easily, chew less effectively, live alone, lose appetite, take more medications, spend less time outdoors, and have more chronic disease. At the same time, symptoms of deficiency may be dismissed as normal aging. Fatigue, weakness, forgetfulness, slower healing, reduced appetite, low mood, fragile bones, and poor balance can all be accepted as inevitable when nutrition may be contributing substantially. Ancient nutritional needs continue. Modern longevity does not erase them. In some ways, it makes them more visible because maintaining health into older age depends on supporting the same basic biology for longer. Then there is the social layer, which matters more than people sometimes admit. Food is shaped by income, education, time, culture, neighborhood, stress, transportation, cooking facilities, family routines, and advertising. It is easier to say, just eat better, than to build a life in which better eating is actually practical. If fresh food is expensive, time is scarce, skills are limited, and exhaustion is constant. The body's ancient needs are forced to bargain with a modern environment that is not neutral. Deficiency is sometimes a personal problem. It is also often a structural one. The body may be missing nutrients not because the person does not care, but because the food system rewards convenience and cost before nourishment, and because life leaves people too tired to resist that arrangement consistently. There is something almost tragicomic about this. Humans can now obtain 12 flavors of sweetened yogurt at any hour, but many still do not get enough magnesium, iron, zinc, iodine, or vitamin D. We can debate protein powders with near-religious intensity, while ignoring the fact that some people have been living for months on coffee, toast, snack bars, and the occasional apologetic salad. We can buy elaborate supplements meant to improve performance, while quietly missing the simpler truth that performance begins with sufficient food, balanced meals, daylight, and tissues built from ordinary nutrients. Modern nutrition is often extremely sophisticated at the edges and surprisingly shaky at the center. That center is what matters most. Ancient human needs are not glamorous. Enough protein, enough mineral-rich food, enough vitamins from varied sources, enough energy to avoid chronically stripping the body for parts, enough sunlight or vitamin D support, enough iodine to make thyroid hormone, enough iron to support blood, enough B12 where intake or absorption is at risk, enough calcium and protein and loading to preserve the skeleton, enough zinc to heal and grow and defend. The body has been asking for versions of these things for a very long time. It still is. This is why deficiencies still happen today, because modern food abundance can obscure biological insufficiency, because convenience can replace completeness, because restriction can outpace planning, because reward can outrun nourishment, because digestion and absorption are not guaranteed, because stress and fatigue distort appetite, because people can be overfed and undernourished at the same time, because old bodies and pregnant bodies and growing bodies all carry ancient requirements into modern chaos, because the body is still made of cells and blood and bone and nerve, no matter how advanced the grocery store becomes, and perhaps most importantly, deficiencies still happen because the body is patient. It compensates. It borrows from bone, conserves iron, dulls appetite, sheds hair, slows thought, flattens mood, lowers performance, heals more slowly, and keeps going. That patience is admirable, but it also hides trouble. The body does not usually protest at the first missed nutrient-dense meal. It adapts quietly until adaptation itself becomes the symptom. By then, the person may think their new lower level of energy or resilience is simply who they are now, but often it is not identity. It is undersupply. So the modern diet creates a peculiar illusion. Because food is abundant, people assume nourishment is abundant. Because severe deficiency diseases are less common or less visible in some places, people assume deficiency itself is a relic of history. But the body does not share that illusion. It still lives by old rules. It still needs the same materials, and when those materials are missing, it still responds in the same essential ways, slowly, practically, and without much concern for whether the shortage comes from famine, fashion, fatigue, money, fear, or convenience. Which is why the final and perhaps most important part of this story is not only about what goes wrong, but about what the body has been trying to say all along when deficiency begins. Because before breakdown becomes obvious, there is usually a quieter stage where the body gives us one last chance to listen. There is a comforting idea many people carry without quite saying it out loud. The idea is that if something were truly wrong, the body would make it obvious. It would produce a clear symptom, a dramatic sign, an unmistakable interruption. It would not leave us guessing. It would not murmur in vague little inconveniences and expect us to interpret them correctly, while also answering emails, buying groceries, paying bills, and trying to remember where we put the charger. If the body needed help, surely it would say so plainly. But the body is not always plain. Very often it's patient first. It adjusts, it compensates, it reroutes, it borrows from its own reserves. It lowers expectations in one tissue so another can continue functioning. It shaves small amounts of energy from here, slows repair there, thins maintenance somewhere else, and keeps the whole system moving as best it can. That patience is one of the great kindnesses of biology. It allows us to survive inconsistency, stress, illness, and scarcity. It lets us keep going through seasons that are not ideal. But it is also one of the reasons nutrient deficiencies become so easy to miss. The body does not always begin by shouting, it begins by managing. And a management from the inside often just feels like life. A little more tired than before, a little more brittle, a little less warm, a little less focused, a little less patient, a little less steady when standing up, a little less enthusiastic about food, a little more hair in the brush, a little more effort in the stairs, a little more soreness in the mouth, a little slower healing, a little more reaching for snacks that do not satisfy, a little more sense that you are somehow not fully charged. These are not the kinds of things that force instant alarm. They are the kinds of things people fold into their idea of themselves. I guess I'm just tired. I guess I'm not a morning person. I guess my skin is bad now. I guess this is what getting older feels like. The body lowers its performance just enough that the person can keep up the story. What we have really been following tonight is that quiet period before the body is forced to speak more loudly, before the obvious anemia, before the fracture, before the profound fatigue, before the nerve symptoms, before the obvious thyroid slowing, before the hair thinning becomes alarming, before the appetite collapses further, before the skin and nails become impossible to ignore, before the mind becomes so foggy that even ordinary tasks begin to feel unstable. The body usually offers a long preface, and most of us, very understandably, miss it. That is not a moral failure. It is not evidence that people are inattentive or ungrateful or detached from themselves. It is simply the consequence of being human in a world full of competing explanations. Modern life offers endless reasons to feel less than ideal. Stress is real. Poor sleep is real. Grief is real. Overwork is real. Anxiety is real. Parenting is real. Illness is real. Screens are real. Winter is real. Disappointment is real. It would be strange if we did not sometimes feel low, distracted, worn down, or physically less than our best. So when a nutrient deficiency begins its slow work, it enters a crowded room. It does not have to disguise itself very carefully. It can stand comfortably behind stress and wave only a little. That may be why one of the gentlest and most useful things we can do for ourselves is to take the body more literally. Not fearfully, not obsessively, and not with the anxious habit of turning every small symptom into a catastrophe. But literally. If the body keeps telling the same story in several ways, it is worth listening. If tiredness is joined by pallor, breathlessness, hair shedding, restless legs, or heavy periods, perhaps that story deserves attention. if low mood is joined by cold intolerance, dry skin, constipation, and sluggishness, perhaps that story deserves attention too. If poor concentration arrives with numbness, strange fatigue, balance changes, and mouth soreness, that is not merely personality under pressure. If wounds heal poorly, food tastes dull, the appetite has faded, and infections keep lingering, perhaps the body is not being dramatic. It may simply be undersupplied. Listening to the body is sometimes described in airy, mystical language, but the reality is often much plainer and much more useful. It means noticing patterns, noticing changes from your own baseline, respecting persistence, paying attention when several small things gather instead of treating each one as unrelated. The body often deals in clusters, not isolated messages. A single bad night of sleep proves very little. A season of thin hair, brittle nails, heavy fatigue, and breathlessness says more. One mouth ulcer is common. Repeated cracks at the corners of the mouth, a smooth, sore tongue, and low energy say more. The body is usually less mysterious once you stop demanding that it speak in one perfect symptom at a time. There is also an important tenderness in realizing that many bodily struggles are practical rather than personal. If the body is short on iron, it is not weak-willed. If B12 is low, the fog is not laziness. If zinc is low, slow healing is not failure. If calcium and vitamin D have been inadequate for years, bone loss is not a moral flaw. If appetite is distorted by poor sleep, nutrient-poor eating, and chronic stress, that is not gluttony or indiscipline in any simple sense. Sometimes the body is not resisting you. It is trying, with diminishing resources, to continue being a body. That shift in perspective matters because shame is such a poor tool for understanding physiology. People are often cruelest to themselves precisely when their bodies are functioning under strain. They call themselves lazy when they are iron deficient. They call themselves scattered when they are depleted. They call themselves weak when their muscles, bones, or hormones are undersupported. They call themselves vain when visible signs of deficiency trouble them. They call themselves dramatic when unexplained symptoms accumulate. But the body does not benefit from insult. It benefits from interpretation, support, investigation, and enough patience to ask what conditions would allow it to function better. That word, conditions, may be the most honest word in this whole subject. Much of health is conditional, not in the fragile, pessimistic sense, but in the material sense. Brains think under conditions. Bones remodel under conditions. Blood is built under conditions. Hormones are produced under conditions. Skin renews under conditions. Appetite stabilizes under conditions. And nutrients are part of those conditions. They are not everything. Sleep matters. Activity matters. Sunlight matters. Relationships matter. Illness matters. Medicine matters. But nutrients are woven through all of it. They are part of what makes recovery possible, thought clear, movement easy, and resilience more available. There is something deeply human in how easily we forget that. We like explanations that flatter our sense of control or our sense of identity. We are tired because we work hard, distracted because the world is noisy, low because life is difficult, slow because we are aging, craving because we are indulgent, not hungry because we are stressed. These explanations often contain truth, but the body is usually less impressed by narrative than by chemistry. Sometimes what feels like an existential problem is at least partly a supply problem. That does not make life shallow or mechanical. It makes life embodied. To be embodied is to live with limits and materials. It means your thoughts are taking place in tissue. Your patience is happening in a nervous system. Your motivation is unfolding in a body that needs oxygen, glucose, amino acids, minerals, vitamins, and sleep. Your emotional life is not reducible to these things, but neither is it separate from them. Once you truly accept that, the body's quieter messages begin to feel less annoying and more generous. Fatigue is not always the enemy. Sometimes it's the most polite warning the body can give. Hair shedding is not always vanity. Sometimes it's budget cuts. Poor appetite is not always a quirk. Sometimes it is a clue. Cold hands, sore mouth, brittle nails, weak muscles, brain fog, slow healing, dull taste, constipation, pale skin, restless legs, low mood, shortness of breath, poor exercise tolerance, strange cravings, aching bones, trouble standing from a chair, getting sick more often, feeling less bright than you remember being. None of these should be turned into panic, but neither should they always be brushed aside. And perhaps that is the gentlest place to arrive at the end of this journey. Not fear, but respect. Respect for the fact that the body usually tries to cope long before it tries to alarm. Respect for how much work it is doing behind the scenes to preserve the essentials. Respect for the possibility that not feeling like myself is often meaningful. Respect for how ordinary nutrient deficiency can be and how understandable. People do not become deficient only through neglect or ignorance. They become deficient because life is busy, food environments are strange, appetites get distorted, blood loss happens, digestion changes, money runs tight, restrictions accumulate, illness interferes, and the body keeps compensating until the compensation itself becomes the burden. That understanding can make self-care feel less like performance and more like maintenance. Not glamorous, not moral, not the subject of dramatic internet declarations, just maintenance. Regular meals that contain actual nourishment, enough protein to support tissues, attention to iron where iron loss is likely, awareness of B12 where intake or absorption may be at risk, enough calcium and vitamin D and movement to support the skeleton, enough varied food to cover the quieter minerals and vitamins that no one writes songs about, enough sunlight or appropriate supplementation where needed, enough willingness to see a pattern and ask whether the body has been trying to explain something in plain biological terms. Maintenance also includes allowing help to be ordinary. A blood test is ordinary. A clinician's question about periods, digestion, diet, medications or weight changes is ordinary. A supplement used appropriately when deficiency is present is ordinary. Eating more deliberately is ordinary. Letting nutrition matter without turning it into a religion is ordinary. The body often responds beautifully to ordinary support because its needs, though many, are not usually theatrical. They are steady, repetitive, and old. There is also wisdom in noticing how much the body wants to recover when given the chance. This may be the most hopeful fact in all of tonight's subject. Deficiency is rarely a one-way door. Iron stores can be rebuilt, B12 can be restored, zinc can rise, folate can improve, vitamin D can be corrected, appetite can return, skin can heal, hair can settle, mood can lift, thought can sharpen, bone can be supported. The body is not looking for perfection, it is looking for enough. Enough to stop rationing so aggressively, enough to stop borrowing from reserves, enough to stop speaking through symptoms because conditions have improved. Often what follows is not some dramatic transformation into a superhuman state. It is something quieter and better, the return of ease. People often describe that ease in small phrases. I didn't realise how bad I felt until I felt better. I have energy again. My mind is clearer. Food tastes normal. I'm warmer. I'm not out of breath all the time. I feel more like myself. Those sentences are modest, but they contain a great truth. Health is often felt not as excitement, but as the absence of unnecessary effort. The body no longer has to fight so hard for ordinary tasks. The day stops feeling like it is built of heavier material. And still, even after everything we have explored, it is worth ending where we began, with gentleness. Not every symptom means deficiency. Not every hard season is nutritional. Not every moment of fatigue requires a theory. Bodies are complex. Lives are complicated. Sometimes you're simply tired. Sometimes you're sad because something sad happened. Sometimes your hair is shedding because life has been hard. Sometimes your appetite is strange because your sleep is poor and your routine is fractured. It would be a mistake to turn the body into a puzzle box where every inconvenience must hide a dramatic deficiency. That is not listening. That is interrogation. Listening is calmer. It is noticing when something persists, noticing when the pattern broadens, noticing when rest does not solve what rest should solve, noticing when the surface and the feeling beneath it begin to tell the same story, noticing when your body seems to be speaking in more than one voice at once, through energy, appetite, skin, thought, and strength. Listening means allowing the possibility that the body has reasons, and that those reasons are often less mysterious than they first seem. Tonight we have spent a long time with shortages, clues, compensations, and quiet signals. We have followed the body through blood and bone, skin and hair, appetite and mood, hormones and memory, all the little places where deficiency makes itself known. And perhaps the most useful thing to carry away is not a list of symptoms or a fear of missing something. It is a softer habit of attention, the kind that asks now and then how the body has really been doing. Not whether it has been surviving, bodies are very good at surviving, but whether it has been functioning with enough support to feel like itself. So if you're lying here tonight feeling a little more tired, a little more curious, or a little more forgiving toward the strange practical creature that carries you through the world, that may be enough. The body does not always need dramatic vows. It often needs steadier meals, a bit more care, a bit more respect for what its signals mean, and the occasional willingness to believe it before the symptoms become impossible to ignore. That may be one of the kindest things we can offer ourselves, to listen while the body is still speaking softly. And now, as the day loosens and the room grows quieter, perhaps let that thought settle with you for a while. The body is not perfect, but it is rarely random. It is always trying to maintain, protect, adapt, and continue. When something is missing, it does not usually fail at once. It whispers first, it leaves clues, it waits. And if we are lucky and patient and a little attentive, we can often hear what it has been trying to say before it has to raise its voice.